Good morning. Can I welcome members, officers and public here in the gallery and watching on the webcast. The London Assembly is the voice of London, composed of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and scrutinise his policies. This is Mayor's Question Time meeting of the Assembly, which means all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. In a case of an emergency and any need to exit the building, guests seated in the public gallery should follow security staff, and Assembly members should follow the meeting clerk. Members also are reminded that any electronic devices should not be placed in front of the microphones. Can I ask the clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from the Deputy Chair, Assembly Member Boff, and also Assembly Members Fortune and Baker.
Thank you. Before we begin, I would like to welcome members of the Belgrade Assembly, as well as students from the Phoenix Academy, young people from Tooting and Mitcham United, as well as PA training here in the gallery today. Morning. Since the last Assembly member meeting on the 16th of March, the Housing Committee published a report on exempt accommodation in London, uncovering how many rogue providers are targeting the vulnerable for profit, and to launch the report, an event was held in Westminster with Bob Blackman MP and Crisis. The Transport Committee held a Q&A session with Andy Lord, Transport for London Commissioner, and Seb Dance, the Deputy Mayor for Transport, on topics including road user charging and London's bus network. The Police and Crime Committee examined the case report into culture and standards at the Met Police with Baroness Casey, the report author, Sir Mark Rowley, Commissioner for Metropolitan Police Service, and Sophie Linden, the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, attending the meeting. And for the second of the two meetings on whole life cycle, carbon and the circular economy in London's building environment, the Planning and Regeneration Committee looked at how London's plan policies could lead to more sustainable outcomes for buildings in London. Can I ask the Assembly to note the interest set out at item number 2? Do Assembly members have any other disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests which include any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality which are not reflected on the authority register of gifts and hospitality? No, thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm the minutes of the Mayor's Question Time meeting held on... Is this better? Thank you. I'll just repeat what I've said. Can I ask the Assembly to note the interest set out in item number 2? And do Assembly members have any other disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality? No, I'll take silence as being no. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm the minutes of the Mayor's Question Time meeting held on the 23rd of February 2023 to be signed by me as true record? Can I ask the Assembly's formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period for 10th February 1993 from 10th February to 9th March 2023? I will now ask the Mayor to give a 5 minutes update on matters occurring since the publication of the report. Mr. Mayor, may I take the opportunity of wishing you a happy Ramadan Mubarak, and I look forward to your update. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to start by addressing the deeply disturbing findings of Baroness Louise Casey's review of the Met. There is a request for an urgent oral update on this matter, so I'll move straight to my response to that request. I must start by expressing my thanks and gratitude to Baroness Casey for undertaking this work and for the rigour and diligence with which she has approached such an important task. Following a series of appalling scandals, I asked for this independent review to be conducted because I was growing increasingly concerned by the cultural issues and systemic failings within the Met Police Service. The evidence uncovered by Baroness Casey is damning. Not only did she find proof of institutional racism, institutional misogyny and institutional homophobia, but she found that the Met Police Service to be defensive, resistant to change and unwilling to engage with communities. Let me be clear. Her report marks one of the darkest moments in the Met's near 200-year history. Some of the attitudes and behaviours she exposed within the ranks of the Met are utterly vile. They don't belong to any century, let alone the 21st century. As Mayor, I've already acted to put the MPS on a path of far-reaching systemic and cultural reform with the appointment of a new commissioner and leadership team who are committed to change. But clearly, the Met Police Service needs to do much more and fast to root out bad behaviour, raise standards and regain the trust and confidence of London's communities. It is on, Chair.
I think it's a problem with the system, Mr. Mayor.
Chair. Thanks, sir.
I don't think it'll work either.
Thanks, Zach. This review must be nothing less than a watershed moment, and I expect all the recommendations to be accepted and implemented quickly and in full. I've spent much of my professional life trying to reform the police and improve the service Londoners receive, first as a human rights lawyer, then as a Member of Parliament, and now as Mayor of London. And so I want to assure Londoners that I'll be unflinching in my resolve when it comes to supporting and holding the new Commissioner to account as he works to overhaul the force. We shouldn't forget that the Met Police Service has many committed professional police officers and staff who want to see and be part of this change. It's in their interests, as well as in the interest of all London's communities, that we succeed. Chair, can I finish by saying this? As Mayor, I see police reform as a critical part of my mayoralty, and I'll not rest until Londoners have the police service they need and deserve, one that's trusted, one that's representative, and one that delivers the highest possible service to every community in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that some members want to come in with supplementary questions on the oral, and Assembly Member Umesh Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, it is recommended that you chair a quarterly policing board following this review. How do you see this board taking forward the recommendations and implementing the change that is needed? And how will it differ from MOPAC, the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime?
Thank you. What the review showed was because of the defensiveness of the police service over some time, and the phrase I think used was playing off MOPAC versus the Home Office, one of the things that Dame Louise Casey suggested was this policing board, and for it to be open and transparent with outside expertise on there as well. It will supplement the work of the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. And we know from the Transport for London board, when I took over in 2016, we radically overhauled that board to make it more representative, to ensure that the non-executive directors worked with the executive team, but also held them to account as well. And I'm hoping to see the new policing board do something similar. And I personally, on Dame Louise Casey's recommendation, will be chairing that.
So MOPAC is an overview of the Met. I mean, do you see the board as an advisory board?
Well, one of the things that we've got to do is change the defensiveness. So the more transparency there is from the Met, the easier the job will be to hold the Met to account. I take the comments made by Louise Casey yesterday around the PCC. Similar comments made in relation to the work of other committees, whether it's Home Affairs Select Committee or the Home Secretary. The key thing is, with a new Commissioner who's determined to be open, not defensive, to be willing to change, not resistant to change, that we have that openness. We can only hold the Met to account if there's a collaborative approach from the Met Police Service. If they continue to be defensive, we'll have to try and persuade the government to make changes in legislation. I hope that won't be necessary, because I'm hopeful with the new Commissioner we have, there'll be a willingness to provide the data, the documentation, the materials we need to improve the police service. It's in their interests for there to be more transparency and more accountability, because it'll mean they raise their game.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, in light of the review characterizing the Met as institutionally homophobic, how do you reflect on the murders of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Kowari, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor, murders that were committed in my constituency of Barking and Dagenham? How do we ensure these failings do not happen again?
Well, can I just, Chair, commend the member who for some years now has been raising the concerns of his community, not just the 4 families affected directly by Stephen Porter's horrific murders, but the concerns, and I know the local MPs in the council have also raised the issues in relation to this. As soon as the inquest finished, we at City Hall asked the police watchdog, the IPC, and Her Majesty's Inspectorate to look into this matter, because evidence was revealed at the inquest, which wasn't before the police watchdog before the inquest, so they've reopened this matter. You'll see some of the examples that Louise Casey gives of the experience of police officers from the LGBTQ+ community. So these aren't just members of the public or victims of crime or bereaved families. These are people employed by the police service, treated appallingly within the police service. And that's one of the reasons I suspect Dame Louise Casey found, in addition to institutional racism, institutional misogyny, but institutional homophobia. And the new commissioner and his leadership team are determined not to be homophobic, but to be anti-homophobic as well.
Mr. Mayor, can I take this opportunity to pay tribute to the sisters of Jack Taylor, Donna and Jenny, with whom I've been working over the last few months. They're remarkable doughty campaigners, and we're working on a charter to combat homophobia in the police service, hopefully with the help of Stonewall as well, and Lord Cashman. Mr. Mayor, my final question. The vast majority of officers do a great job, for the record. In response to my question yesterday to the Commissioner regarding any attempts to obstruct his reforms, this is what the Commissioner had to say, and I quote, "Change is non-negotiable. The ones who are not up for it will take on. The minority, if they do not want to get on the bus, is their problem. We will sort them out." Strong and the right words. Your comments, please.
Well, firstly, can I also associate myself completely with your remarks about the families who've been working to ensure a light is shone on the homophobia that was shown in the investigations into Port's victims. One of the things that we do know is this isn't the first review, this isn't the first report. We've got to try and make sure it's the last one with these sorts of findings, and that's why we need to make sure there's proper change. We know from previous reports there were backlashes. We know from previous reports the progress promised wasn't made. And that's why it's right that you remind us of the comments of Sir Mark yesterday, but also where we can, we support the police. And I'd ask every police officer and member of the police staff to also, within the organisation, support the police. I'll do my bit, not just to support the police, but as I'm required to do, hold them to account as well.
I would just say that Sir Mark's comments about neighbourhood policing are spot on. They are not there just to take pictures with babies, but all to deal with criminals out of the streets. This did welcome stuff, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make this comment for people sitting in the public gallery. If anyone is using a hotspot here, please don't do so. The hotspot interferes with our microphones. So can you please, if anyone's sitting here is using hotspot, please don't do so. Thank you. The next Assembly member who's asked to contribute is Sam Mohammed, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Yesterday's report was both devastating, shocking, and also more of the same. And I would remark, sitting through the session and having read the report, that I was disappointed, and I'm sure many other black Londoners are disappointed. Some will no doubt use stronger words about the resistance of Sir Mark Rowley to use the word institutional, particularly in relation to race, and particularly in light of the fact of the murder of Stephen Lawrence 30 years ago, and the changes that we all assumed and hoped had been made and were continuing to be made through the Met. But my question is really about the treatment of not just black Londoners, but also of the staff of the Metropolitan Police, black officers, and the ways in which they and their careers have been affected by that institutional racism, and the report makes it clear that it's at all levels of the Met. I'm fully behind Sadiq in his wanting to turn that around. But in the report, it does also, somebody commented, one of the people that gave evidence, that there have been so many watershed moments. We are drowning, I think, words to that effect. And yet the change has not come. And so I want to ask you, why has there been so little change? What do you think is going to change with this commissioner? And obviously, similar and equivalent issues apply to disabled staff and officers at the Met. And LGBTQ Londoners, as my colleague has said, and most recently with the abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard and the deaths of Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry. What's going to change now?
Look, thank you for what you said and for your questions. Look, before I was a politician, I was a lawyer, and I acted for not just black Londoners, but black police officers and black staff members. So I recognise the awful experience shown in this review. And I also fully accept the findings of Dame Louise Casey, who found that our police service is institutionally racist, institutionally homophobic, and institutionally misogynistic. And that's not to denigrate every single police officer or police staff who works for the Met Police Service, many of whom risk their lives, on a daily basis to keep us safe. But it's to recognise that there are systems and cultures that have allowed to take place that foster an environment where people join the police service because they want to abuse that position when they get the warrant card. Allow a situation where somebody's not allowed to be confident because they're worried about being bullied and so forth. What Sadiq has done is accept fully the analysis and also accept the prognosis and the way forward, which is really important. And the difference this time is there is agreement, not just from me as the Mayor, not just from the new Commissioner and his leadership team, but also from the government. I spoke to the Home Secretary earlier this week about the need for reform as well. And it is really important there is reform, because I'm like you, sick to death of reviews and reports and findings, and listening to officers, staff members, members of the public who'd be treated appallingly. It really has to be, to paraphrase your quote, that watershed moment. The good news is Dame Louise Casey didn't simply lay out the symptoms and the diagnosis, but set out, as I said, the prognosis and the way forward. And we're determined to make progress. You'll know, I've already announced support in relation to Leadership Academy, support in relation to the victims, £3 million, support in relation to more PCSOs and so forth. We're working with Sadiq on the turnaround plan, and I'm confident that we can turn things around. We have to. What's the alternative?
I completely agree with you. And one of the other things as well that I'm really keen to see from changes from this report as a result of this, there were references to the way in which women who are victims of domestic abuse, and again, officers as well as Londoners, and the social impact, which is undeniable. And I'm glad the Commissioner yesterday did not deny the impact of stop and search, particularly on young black men, young black Londoners. The review of that and the way in which the police prioritises its efforts to police Londoners, that really needs to change, and it needs to happen within the time frame, if not earlier than the time frame that Louise Casey has set out in her report of the next 2 years.
I think we've got to give Sadiq and his new team some time, but I think you're right. We can't wait for 5 years or 2 years. I think the phrase used by Dame Louise Casey, which Londoners will recognise, is the black community is over-policed and under-protected. Women are under-protected. As Unmesh Desire said, many in the LGBTQ+ community feel under-protected. And we've got to address all those issues at the same time as ensuring continue to make progress on violent crime coming down as we've done over the last few years.
Thank you. Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I want to ask some questions about the finding of institutional misogyny in the report. And I think all of us were aware of police failings with regards to the prosecution, for example, of rape and sexual assault. But what this report laid bare was the sheer scale of misogyny throughout the ranks of the Met Police, but also externally in their attitudes to the public who made complaints, primarily women who made complaints. Baroness Casey describes it as a boys' club culture where the mistreatment of women is a feature of that culture. Now, I know that you take this extremely seriously from your past work to improve the outcomes for violence against women and girls. What can you do in your role as chair of MOPAC or in your new policing board to make sure that this is really honed in on and that we can see tangible results?
Well, one of the things that we did when we set up England's first violence reduction unit was to also focus on violence against women and girls. One of the things that we didn't do was just focus on violence in the streets amongst young people to do with knife crime and gun crime. We included deliberately violence against women and girls. Our public health approach deliberately includes the approach we're taking towards violent crime to do with young people, but also a public health approach when it comes to violence against women and girls. And it gives me no comfort to say actually it was our rape review that Claire Waxman did in 2019, then in 2021. It was us starting Operation Zeteria that's led to some of the uncoverings across the country, low attrition rates and so forth. So you know, Sir Mark understands this, Dame Lynn understands this, their leadership team understands this, they fully accept the analysis from Dame Louise Casey. But that's the difference we discussed. I remember at a Police and Crime Committee, and I was gobsmacked when the former Chief Inspector didn't realise the difference between being anti-racist and not being racist. And that's why it's really important. Being anti-misogyny is integral to this. Being anti-homophobic, being anti-racist, because you want to create a culture where this thing doesn't take root. You want to educate, you want to make sure it's preventative action to stop that happening. But also you've got to make sure when somebody does make a complaint in the police service that it's investigated properly and quickly. We know from the interim report from Dame Louise Casey, the average length of time for a complaint to be investigated when an officer complains against an officer is more than 430 days. So another officer who's the victim of this thinks, what's the point of making a complaint? I'm still working with the sexist, the misogynist. Similarly, line managers think, what's the point of pursuing a bad officer because nothing ever happens? And that's why we've invested from City Hall, no support from the government in relation to improving human resources, supervision and so forth. The final thing on this, Joanna, is really important, which is that what Dame Louise Casey says is there's a problem in recruitment, in vetting, in supervision and in the misconduct process. And that's why, you know, we need national change in this area, because it's really important that those regulations, those processes are changed.
Thank you. I think what was shocking in the report was obviously the statistics, but the individual accounts of officers, particularly women officers, with regards to the misogyny. But some of those statistics, for example, Baroness Casey found that 85% of allegations of police officers who had allegedly committed domestic violence or sexual assault, 85% of those allegations resulted in no further action. And she stated that the underlying assumption was that public complaints were tied to a false or malicious intent. I really want to know that your new policing board is going to really be honing in on some of those specific statistics and specific areas where you can really track progress. Is that something that you're prepared to do?
Well, with the agreement of the Commissioner, it's really important that we recognise the sea change in the attitude of this Commissioner from previous ones, because unless we have access, we can't do anything. The only reason why Dame Louise Casey's report was able to shine a light on these areas was because we managed to persuade the former Commissioner, because of the series of scandals, to allow Dame Louise Casey in. You can't do these reviews, you can't do the scrutiny without having the information and the data. And that's why it's really important. We've got a commitment from this Commissioner to be open. He understands the importance of that openness leading to hiring standards being hired, trust going up and crime going down. And so I'm confident. I'm confident we can bring about that change. I'm confident that the policing board will be transformative, but I'm also confident that the government understands the importance of changing the regulations as well to make it easy to get rid of, those officers when they get rid of.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other Assembly members want to ask questions on the Mayor's oral update? No? Okay. We now move to the questions on the priority order paper. Each group is allocated an amount of time to ask the questions that is proportionate to their size. The first question is the name of Assembly Member Best. It's on the accessible transport.
Improving accessibility on the transport network is a crucial part of my work to build a better London for everyone. Our streets and transport system can be excluding to people with physical or sensory impairments, neurodiverse people, and people living with chronic health conditions, including those that are not visible. Engaging with customers to better understand the barriers they face has been vital in shaping TfL's accessibility programme. A new research panel is being set up, made up of customers with different disabilities, whose experiences and perceptions will be used in future decision-making. Physical accessibility is a big part of this, and we're making good progress. Every bus in London is wheelchair accessible, and 95% of bus stops are step-free. There are now 200 step-free stations across the TfL network. A third of the tube network is now step-free. That's a 33% increase since 2016, as well as over 60 stations on the London Overground. Every Elizabeth Line station, DLR station and tram stop is step-free. Every TfL pier is accessible and the cable car is step-free. Work to deliver improvements is underway at Paddington and Knightsbridge stations, working with third parties. TfL has also secured £60 million for step-free access projects at Leighton and Colindale stations through a combination of levelling up, borough and developer funding. The TfL Go app is regularly updated, and alongside other accessibility information now shows journeys with the least walking to accommodate different needs. All black cabs are wheelchair accessible, and London has around 600 wheelchair accessible private hire vehicles. We invest £8 million into the taxi card scheme that subsidises taxi journeys for elderly and disabled Londoners. We also spend £24 million a year on Dial-A-Ride, which is meeting its target of fulfilling 90% of journey requests. TfL is investing in a new booking and scheduling system to improve this service even further. Signage to improve step-free wayfinding in stations has been installed at 16 Tube, 11 Elizabeth Line and 2 DLR stations, with one more to follow. TfL has plans to improve toilets that are most in need of repair and is currently identifying areas where accessible toilets are needed to improve the provision across the network. And TfL continues to update and improve its disability equality training so that the staff can provide high-quality customer service.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm only sorry there that I think our security point has been very busy today. So you might have noticed, just as you were answering that question, that we've been joined by the National Federation of the Blind for the UK. So thank you all for coming, and I'm sorry that they missed the majority of your answer there. And I think as well we'd like to probably welcome Nellie, who I believe is the first dog in our new chamber at City Hall. So welcome to Nellie. You can't quite see, I'm not sure, Mr. but just down. I'm sure you'll get a chance to meet Nellie. I just want to take you back to the 15th of February when you were speaking on Eddie Nestor, and you spoke to a caller from the National Federation of the Blind UK regarding floating bus stops in London, and you committed to a meeting with them. You haven't been in touch since. They followed up with you on that day, the 15th of February, and subsequently on the 1st of March. Could I get a commitment from you that you will get dates from your diary to them today for a meeting? Yeah,
I'll make sure that either Seb Dance or myself meets with the relevant group as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. I wanted to, I think maybe we may slightly disagree on the point of the safety of floating bus stops, but you may well have seen the Telegraph investigation on Sunday, which found they were quoted, they were death trap, bike lane, zebra crossings that have seen just 1 in 10 cyclists stopping for pedestrians as they go by. Further, it explained that yourself and Transport for London will repeatedly warn that the majority of cyclists refuse to stop or slow down for zebra crossing. And independent researchers working for the Mayor's Transport Authority revealed how few there were, and recommended an awareness campaign around how to behave at these bypasses. Is that something you would support and look into, an awareness campaign around how cyclists should behave at these points?
Well, thanks for raising this issue. I looked into the issue after it was raised with me, and what's clear is that TfL's approach is completely consistent with the Department for Transport's guidance and approach. But you're right, all cyclists are required to stop for pedestrians and zebra crossings in accordance with the highway code. Clearly, if it's the case that's not happening, we need to not just raise awareness, but need to try and ensure there's enforcement as well. And there are dedicated crossing points, and so we need to make sure that, you know, that, yes, of course, we keep cyclists safe from the risk of pulling out into traffic when a bus is moving from a bus stop. But at the same time, pedestrians, particularly the visually impaired ones you referred to, aren't in danger because of cyclists not following the highway code, and it's really important that they feel safe as well.
Thanks. And then, of course, the petition that was submitted to you, it's not just the visually impaired, but it is a wider issue for many disabled groups, Age UK, I'd say, as well as some of the, you know, getting off buses regularly with small children. It is a widely wide issue. And so I would... We know there's obviously research going on at the moment, and this is an issue I have written to the Secretary of State about as well. It's not just yourself that I'm talking to. But will you look to stop any funding for further floating bus stops whilst research is carried off, and to make sure that we aren't unnecessarily putting people in danger?
Well, I'm not sure we can stop further bus stop bypasses, particularly bearing in mind they're consistent with DfT guidance. What I am willing to do, and I think we must do, is look into safety concerns raised by, as you said, not just those who are visually impaired, but others as well, to make sure, you know, in the quest to make cyclists safe, we don't inadvertently, because a minority of cyclists aren't following the rules, endanger others. And so I'm more than happy to ask the Deputy Mayor to take this away and see what more can be done, including meeting with relevant groups to see what can be done, but also see what can be done working with the government. I think this is an area where I think the government and all of us probably agree.
Thank you. And I just want to come back quickly to that awareness campaign. Will you look at further signage at those floating bus stops that we have to immediately deal with this and warn of the impact and how people should be behaving? Because, like I said, the evidence is quite clear, and I hope you do get an opportunity to watch one of the films that has been compiled. It is really quite shocking. So will you look to immediately raise awareness and look at signage at these stops?
I mean, just to reassure the member that TfL already have begun to see what more that can happen. Seb Dance is already looking into what more that can happen, and to reassure the member that we're doing all that we can within the bounds of reasonableness. I'm more than happy for the team to meet with the member as well. But clearly more needs to be done, because what we can't have is a situation where somebody's seriously hurt or even worse as a consequence of a cyclist not following the highway code and running over somebody. And so it's really important we do this before, God forbid, that happens, rather than afterwards. And so more than happy to throw at this whatever we can to make sure these bus stop bypasses are safer than they currently appear to be.
Thank you. And I do hope you get a moment to speak with some of the members here today before you leave, and hopefully meet with Nellie as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The next question is on the London environment strategy, and it's the name of Assemblymember Bukhari.
Thank you, Chair. Improving London's natural environment will benefit us all. I believe we all have a right to clean air and water. It's the poorest who have the least access to nature, so this is also an issue of social justice. Nature is of huge value for its own sake and the sake of the wildlife we should be protecting, and it plays a vital role in our well-being. It also has an economic value. In 2017, London's Natural Capital Account estimated London's public green spaces to have a gross asset value of more than £91 billion, providing recreation, health and cooling benefits valued at £5 billion per year. As the latest David Attenborough series Wild Isles so vividly shows, the UK is rich in wildlife. In London, we're investing to preserve this and help Londoners access and benefit from nature. Protecting, enhancing and increasing London's nature is central to my environment strategy and 2021 manifesto, including tree canopy and green cover targets, and outlining that all Londoners should live within a 10-minute walk to green space. Since 2016, I've made almost £30 million available for greening. We're delivering 481 greening projects across London and more than 600 hectares of new or improved green and blue space, including river restorations. My London plan protects the green belt and other green space and introduced the urban greening factor to ensure major new developments include nature. Early this week, my London Rewilding Task Force released their recommendations to Rewild London. I announced additional investment in the creation and restoration of priority habitats through 22 projects, including bringing back beavers in Ealing, bees in Bexley and bats in Barnes. I also announced an additional £1 million for rewilding, including for a new competition for a large pilot scheme to restore habitats and reintroduce lost species to London. I'll soon be appointed as the responsible authority for London's local nature recovery strategy. Given the urgency of the climate and ecological crisis, we all need to do more, and I'm calling on the government to invest more to deliver these strategies and improve nature for all, especially in urban areas. London is leading the way, and I look forward to working alongside local authorities to set a strategy that will guide future policies and investments in our great city.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family, and a blessed month for all of us, inshallah. Now, you mentioned the World Rewilding Day and the Rewilding Task Force report, and that release stating that you will engage local communities, support activities linked with rewilding, and build on public interest and enthusiasm around rewilding. Do you think that these sentiments are shared by all Labour-run councils across London?
Well, I don't think we need to pick particularly on Labour councils. That help all councils, whatever political party they are, would want to make sure we support this agenda.
Let's talk about the £40,000 that you spent on the reintroduction of beavers in Ealing, which was brilliant. But there's another part of Ealing where skylarks, barn owls, peregrines, bats, voles and many more species face habitat destruction at the hands of Labour-run Ealing Council, and it would cost nothing to save these species. Ealing Council have ignored residents, campaigners and many qualified wildlife experts. Ealing Council are greenwashing residents by claiming that most of the land will be unaffected by development plans. Now, this is not true. Warren Farm has undergone over 10 years of rewilding, and over 20,000 people have signed a petition to protect the area by making it a local nature reserve. Will you sign the petition and support Ealing residents?
Well, look, my understanding is there are a number of sites across London where there are concerns around de-wilding of sites that have become rewilded sites. The key thing is where there are local plans, they're in accordance with the London plan, and inspectors consider local plans, and I'm sure the inspector will consider the representations made by the Assembly member.
Let's focus on Ealing. Ealing Council has 7 other potential sites to erect new sporting facilities and actually could save Warren Farm. 20 important and endangered species could reside there. Now, the London plan outlines clearly that it's actually your duty to protect metropolitan open land such as Warren Farm, and yet your colleagues seem dead set on knowingly destroying habitats there. Now, Warren Farm is a gift from nature and we must save it. Will you at least write to the Labour leader of Ealing Council calling on him to reconsider the plans and save Warren Farm?
Well, Chair, we have is one version of events, and so what the process is where there's a local plan, it goes to an inspector, and if that local plan is not in accordance with the London plan, my plan, the local plan doesn't go through, and we make representations to an inspector. So my team will be looking at this local plan, like it does all local plans, to see if it's in accordance with the London plan. If it isn't, we'll make representations. We've done it in other parts of the city where there are Labour councils or other councils as well. And so I'm sure the same will happen in this case.
It would be great if you can put yourself forward in terms of saving Warren Farm. The people are listening. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question was in the name of Assemblymember McCartney, which has been converted from the oral question to written answer, Mr. Mayor. So the next oral question is in the name of Assemblymember Russell and is on policed interactions with young people.
Thank you for raising this issue on behalf of the London Youth Board. Last week was Neurodiversity Celebration Week, an opportunity to recognise and celebrate neurological diversity, challenge stereotypes and help build a more inclusive culture. In accordance with the National Police Curriculum, all police officer recruits receive training on mental health awareness and neurodiversity. Officers are taught to utilise the Vulnerability Assessment Framework to provide a tailored response to individuals they interact with, including young people and those who do not present in a neurotypical way. New police officers must also complete a mandatory online learning package as part of their foundation training that provides an introduction to general awareness of mental health conditions, neurodiversity and learning disabilities. In addition, police officers undertake annual public and personal safety training, which is mandatory for all officers up to and including the rank of superintendent. This combines theory with practical experiences to highlight best practice, de-escalation and fair outcomes when interacting with people who are neurodivergent. Police officers, in particular specialist roles, for example, safer school officers, will receive additional training on building trust and confidence with young people, especially those who are identified as vulnerable. In November 2022, the Met Police Service worked with the autism awareness raising charity Anna Kennedy Online to release autism stop and search guidance for officers to use when an individual presents as autistic, including those who carry an autism alert card. This guidance was supported by the National Police Autism Association, and the Met Police Service uses the National Autistic Society publication, Autism, a guide for police officers and staff, to provide guidance to its officers. The MPS also uses embedded staff with lived experience of autism, oppositional defiant disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Tourette's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and other neurodiverse conditions to provide real-time support to staff and individuals interacting with the police service. But more can be done, and through the College of Policing, the MPS has set up the Neurodiversity Tasking Action Group.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for that very full answer. And just to let you know, the London Youth Board are watching on the live stream. So one of the young people I spoke with, who is on the neurodiverse spectrum, said he finds eye contact difficult. He was very keen to be reassured that the police are aware of what he called the eccentricities of neurodiversity, so that an interaction with police doesn't just go wrong by accident. He asked if the Met's advice to Londoners on what to expect from Stop and Search could be updated specifically to support neurodiverse people. And I just wonder if you could have a look into that and perhaps write back to me. I don't expect you to have an answer.
Chair, I'm more than happy to. You raise a really important point, which is eye contact is obviously, a lack of eye contact can be interpreted in somebody having something to hide. And your examples are really good ones. So can I take that away and write back to you?
Thank you. The young people on the youth board also want more support for children who are strip searched. And they suggested 2 ideas that I said I'd run past you. They want 2, not 1, appropriate adults to safeguard children who are being subjected to strip and intimate searches. And they want proper aftercare following this invasive and traumatising experience in the form of support for them and for their families to be able to support them. Again, would you take those ideas away and write back to me?
Chair, I'm more than happy to take those ideas away and either the Deputy Mayor or myself write back to the member.
Thank you. Now, speaking to the Youth Board, it struck me that they are also victims of the Met's culture. The Casey review looked at 650 cases of children being strip searched across 2 years. More than half of the boys were black. In almost a quarter of cases, an appropriate adult wasn't even present. And more than half of these 650 strip searches, no further action was taken. Now, Baroness Casey said that the overuse of intrusive searches on black children points to, and I quote, a collective and continued failure by the Met to understand, accept and address the existence of racism at all levels in the organisation. So given this Casey finding, will you push the Commissioner to end the practice of strip searching children as part of the Met's reset?
So the review into the strip search of children was asked for by the Deputy Mayor and myself because of our concerns, asking, that includes me asking the police watchdog to change the investigation from a conduct to gross misconduct. The problems having a zero approach towards any child being strip searched is, a bad actor could simply give a knife or drugs or whatever to a young person because they would know there's no chance for that young person being strip searched. We've got to be very careful about the unintended consequences of doing so. I'm afraid, and it doesn't give me any pleasure in saying this, there have been examples of police doing strip searches of children and finding really dangerous weapons, Class A drugs, and other things as well. So we've got to be cognizant of that in relation to, yes, addressing the serious issues you raise, but understanding why the police have to do this, but it should be exceptional.
I'm glad to hear you say it should be exceptional. Even this year, 2 children a week are still being strip searched, so it is still happening. And the Youth Board are spending their time thinking about ways to protect themselves and their families from the impact of a police power that even the Met Commissioner has described as having been misused and overused. So I asked if you'd push the Commissioner to end this intrusive practice. I am going to keep an eye on it, but I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. The next question, Mr. Mayor, is in the name of Assemblymember Sheikh. It's on the Windsor Framework.
Thank you, Chair. The Windsor Framework will hopefully solve the problems the UK government made for itself and the people of Northern Ireland when it insisted on a hard Brexit that required border controls across the Irish Sea. What London needs now is for the government to apply the same pragmatism for other blunders it's made in our relationship with the EU. In announcing the framework, the Prime Minister said that Northern Ireland will be in, and I quote, the unbelievably special position, unique position in the entire world, European continent, in having privileged access not just to the UK home market, which is enormous, but also the European Union single market, end quote. That is, of course, the situation before for everyone in London and the rest of the UK prior to the government's hard Brexit. If we want growth and to protect jobs and all livelihoods, all the evidence points to being part of Europe's single market and customs union. I'm pleased the Prime Minister partially agrees. So I'm pleased for Northern Ireland and for London businesses that trade with Northern Ireland, but we need something better for the rest of our country than the government's current bad Brexit deal. British businesses are drowning under the weight of increased bureaucracy, staffing shortages and supply chain issues. Meanwhile, London is being hit hard by the loss of trade and talent to our global competitors because of Brexit. This is not just costing London, but our national economy, and the Treasury is losing tax revenue that could support stretched public services like the NHS. The UK and London is a global lead in many areas, and the foundations of our economy are still strong. But the UK is very much underperforming on economic growth post-pandemic compared to other European countries. More than 6 years after the referendum, and 3 years since we left the European Union, we must all now face the inescapable truth that this unnecessary hardline version of Brexit is gravely weakening the London and UK economy at a time we can least afford it. It's time to abandon the isolationist mentality of the referendum years and open a dialogue with our European neighbours about greater alignment, including a pragmatic debate about the benefits of being part of the customs union and single market.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning to you and Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Economic instability is kind of the sort of major headline in the UK, and I think that's come under years and years of Tories' mismanagement in government. And I think Brexit and the way that that was managed and continues to be managed is a very clear example of that. Going forward, I agree with you. We need to build dialogue with the European Union. We need to tackle the root causes of why people felt like they wanted to vote for Brexit in the first place. Neither at the moment is happening, although there is some light at the end of the tunnel with this Windsor framework. So to that end, I wanted to sort of focus in on one of the aspects that's coming out of it is our membership with the Horizon Europe Science Research Programme, which is vital, I think, for Londoners in terms of giving us access to research programme, to grants, but also to ensure that the UK stays within the international conversation of, being a science superpower. And we saw the importance of that post-pandemic or during the pandemic, of the need for that. So, in your opinion, how much did London benefit from the Horizon Europe Science Research Programme prior to Brexit, and what does London need to receive from this going forward?
Well, I was lucky to spend some time last week with Sir Paul Nurse, Nobel winner, who works at the Crick Institute in King's Cross. And when you see the cross-fertilisation of talent that used to be there, still to some extent, it's largely because of working cross borders with experts in research, sustainable growth, high-level skills, a whole host of areas that are really important to our city, our country, and actually the planet. Work in relation to climate change, urban regeneration, and so forth. The Horizon project was fantastic for us. It meant university students could work with other university students across the globe. Those friendships that were made carried on post-grad and going forward as well. I'm hoping that this thawing of the extreme hard Brexit from this government leads to us rejoining Horizon Europe, being inside the laboratories where the European scientists are doing work, being with other students from European universities, and I'm hoping this leads to us moving towards being members again of Horizon Europe, working with our colleagues in Ireland and other parts of the EU.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, and I think a hard Brexit would set this country back economically and culturally, and I think you're right to highlight that, especially on issues like climate change, international coherent governance is vital, which is why it's so important that we're part of programmes like Horizon Europe Science Research Programme. Thank you very much for your comments this morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Ahmed. It's on the spring budget 2023.
Thank you, Chair. This is another disappointing budget for London and for the millions of Londoners struggling to make ends meet during the cost of living crisis. Electricity bills in the UK rose by 67% and gas bills by almost 130% in the 12 months of January 2023. At the end of last year, food price inflation was at its highest since the late 1970s. Average real terms pay in the UK has fallen at the fastest rate in 2 decades, and Londoners face some of the highest childcare costs in the world. Londoners don't need underfunded programmes that weren't kicking for years or tax cuts for higher earners. They need decisive and meaningful action to support those struggling the most with the rising cost of living. No child should be punished for circumstances beyond their control, and no child should be forced to go hungry. And that's why I announced a historic £130 million emergency funding plan to help families with the spiralling cost of living by ensuring that every primary school child in London will receive free school meals from the next academic year. This emergency programme will help around 270,000 primary school children and save families in London around £440 per child across the year. And I'm continuing to do what I can to help Londoners deal with ongoing cost of living pressures by investing an additional £3.7 million this year and £4.9 million next year in interventions that deliver financial advice and support. That's part of the annual package of £80 million we're spending on cost of living support, which includes our £43 million Warmer Homes programme. I'm disappointed that the government refuses to take the decisive steps needed to help those least well off. I'll continue to lobby the government to provide free school meals to all primary school children on a permanent basis, increase support for people in receipt of disability benefits, and ensure that the most vulnerable receive a basic amount of free energy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family and to all Londoners. Mr. Mayor, shockingly, child hunger has doubled over the past year, and whilst you have taken the initiative that you have to help families with free school meals, the budget was yet again a good opportunity for the Chancellor to expand universal free school meals. But once again, despite overwhelming support for this, he chose not to. And families are now so reliant on food banks that it could almost be regarded as a joke, except that it is so tragic. Mr. Mayor, how are you working with London's food banks as food insecurity rises again, and as we know, and as you've said, food inflation continues to rise?
It's really important issues, not just the issue of hunger and food poverty, but child hunger as well, which is clearly linked with the issue of food insecurity. So with the limited powers and resources we have, we are supporting food partnerships across London. We've got something called the Food Routes Programme, offering short-term capacity grants to every borough in London. That capacity grant is really important to ensure that the staff are there to do the work required in all the boroughs across our city. We're doing what we can to improve the referral systems from food banks into financial advice. Often it's clearly linked, the need for financial advice and the need for food. Supporting and training volunteers is really important. We're playing a role there, and sharing resources across the various food aid organisations that they're working together and collaboratively where they can. And I hope to be able to make more announcements in the next few weeks in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Andrew Boff, who's given his apologies, so will be taken by Assembly Member Devenish, and it's on affordable homes.
Thank you. We've met all our housing targets so far. I've always said, however, that meeting our Affordable Homes Programme 2016 to 2023 housing target is going to be a huge challenge. However, the GLA are doing everything they can, working with our delivery partners to deliver as many affordable homes as possible. We're currently operating in an extremely challenging environment to build affordable homes. This has been recognised by the Homes and Communities Agency and the government. Our partners are grappling with economic turbulence, high interest rates and inflation, significantly increased construction costs, and labour and material shortages. All of these factors impact both cost and delivery. The parameters of the Affordable Housing Programme 2016 to 2023 were set over 7 years ago. Back then, nobody could have predicted the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the building safety crisis, or the impact of the hard Brexit this government has pursued. The overall funding envelope set by the government remains the same, despite the significant impact these major shocks have had on costs. But in the face of tough headwinds, we're still meeting targets and breaking records. Last year, more affordable homes were started in London than at any time since the GLA records began in 2003, including almost 10,000 homes started at social rent levels. Thanks to investment by City Hall, more affordable homes are being built in London than anywhere else in the country. We've smashed the target I set myself in 2016 to fund the delivery of 10,000 new council homes in London. Thanks to my Building Council Homes for Londoners programme, last year more council homes were started in London than any year since the 1970s. I've since doubled our target and we're on track to see 20,000 City Hall funded council home starts by 2024. I've exceeded my target to deliver 1,000 rough sleepers homes and to identify a pipeline of 1,000 community-led homes. In January, I had a productive meeting with Michael Gove, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, who understands the current challenges impacting housing delivery and whose commitment to improving renters' rights and increasing social housing standards is commendable. Affordable housing is too serious an issue to use as a political football, and I'm pleased that Michael Gove agrees that we need to work together to deliver for Londoners. I'll continue to work with delivery partners at all levels to provide the homes that Londoners desperately need.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Mayor.
And to you.
I'm not very clear from your answer whether or not you will, as my question asks, actually meet the target of 116,000 homes by the end of the month. Will you be able to meet that target, please?
Well, we'll endeavour to do so, but as I said in my answer, it's a huge challenge, and I've said in my answer the various headwinds in front of us, but we are definitely throwing everything at this.
So when the London Evening Standard quote said that perhaps you may not meet the target by over 20,000 homes and you may have to give some of the money back to the government, do you expect that to happen? Was that a correct report or an incorrect report, please?
Well, we simply can't say at this stage what we'll get to by the end of the financial year, but nothing I've heard from Michael Gove indicates to him not understanding the seriousness of this issue. Nothing from what he said leads me to believe that if there was, in that theoretical scenario, targets not being met, there'd have to be money returned, but we'll have to wait and see. We've still got some way to go. We know Q4 is when a lot of the returns come in, often a few weeks after Q4. When you compare the first 3 quarters of this year versus last year, we're ahead of where we were last year, and last year was a record-breaking year. But I've set out, as I always am, with candour, some of the challenges we face, so people are, foresighted.
Well, Mr. Mayor, when you were first elected, 6 weeks short of 7 years, so congratulations on that. You did talk both with the mayoral candidate, Zach Goldsmith, and you agreed on one thing. There was a housing crisis. I'm not sure you've actually you're meeting what you promised to meet, but we'll wait for those figures. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Rogers. It's on the Outer London public transport.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm committed to improving the public transport offer in Outer London, and I'll continue to do so up to and after this August. We know that Outer London historically has been more dependent on cars, but we also know that public transport is safer, cleaner, cheaper and more efficient. My transport strategy sets out a goal to provide those travelling in Outer London with sustainable and affordable alternatives. Since 2016, TfL has added rail capacity in Outer London with the Barking, Riverside and Northern Line extensions, opened the new Elizabeth Line, connecting more Londoners to the centre of the city, and introduced 12 new bus routes and 41 extensions, as well as countless frequency increases. I provided additional funding to enable TfL to deliver 1 million more kilometres of bus routes in Outer London, complementing significant enhancements that have already been delivered over the past year, which total over 500,000 kilometres per annum. This includes the new 304 route in Newham, extensions of routes in Lewisham, Route 129, Pontoon Dock, Route 330, Dagenham Park Square, Route 497, and Royal Wharf, Route 241, and frequency increases in Richmond, Hounslow and Hillingdon. I also have plans for extending the 497 from Harold Wood to Upminster, extending the 79 to serve Stonebridge Park, and changing 8 routes in Brent Cross to serve the new Brent Cross rail stations, all of which proposals are now open for consultation. And I've announced plans for a further 1 million kilometres of new bus routes, much of which will be in Outer London. The final stage of delivery of the Elizabeth line will kick in on the 21st of May, transforming journeys from Essex, Berkshire and Outer London to key hotspots including Heathrow Airport and Canary Wharf. TfL is invested in upgrading its tube services through the 4-line modernisations programme, which will directly benefit Outer London. TfL is also making improvements to the Central Line to improve performance and reliability of all 85 trains, providing essential connections for Outer, North West, North East London and Essex, and new rolling stock on the London Overground, and DLR will also deliver additional benefits to Outer London. And TfL is invested in active travel improvements in Outer London, including Cycleway 1 between Enfield and Haringey, Cycleway 42 between Ilford and Bark and Riverside, and Cycleway 49 between Acton and Chiswick, all of which will be delivered by the end of August.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, and thank you for your answer. And thank you for outlining some of the work you're planning in Outer London. Can you tell me how many new bus routes there will be in Outer London by the time ULEZ expands on the 29th of August?
That's subject to consultation, so we'll be able to give more details as we end the engagement and consultation in relation to new bus routes and new extensions as well, and additional frequencies.
How many new bus routes would you like to see? Maybe I'll put it that way. And how many are you planning for?
Well, the ones we're consulting on are the ones I'd like, so I'd like all those to be approved. Clearly there are issues around, bus stops and bus routes and stuff, but I'd want those to be gone through.
Okay, thank you. Many residents have contacted me saying they believe that you're rushing ULEZ expansion without enough time to put in place appropriate mitigations. And recent analysis by the Telegraph shows that across London there are almost 1,000 postcodes 2 miles away from nearest tram or tube stop, more than 9,000 postcodes more than a mile away from a railway station, over 1,500 postcodes are more than 500 metres from a bus stop. Now, 500 metres to a bus stop is a long way to walk for elderly people or people with mobility issues. Do you accept that your ULEZ expansion will put Londoners who live in these areas in Outer London in an awful position, potentially unable to afford to run their vehicles, but also potentially unable to access public transport?
Well, firstly, new data published today shows that in fact 9 out of 10 of those households in Outer London who have a car are compliant, so very few actually have non-compliant vehicles in Outer London. The second point I'd make is I don't recognise the figures that have been read out by the member from the newspaper. The figures that I have from TfL say that 96% of Londoners live within a 5-minute walk of a bus route, 96%, and 99% within 600 metres. But we're doing even more to reduce those walking distances, not just for the reasons that have been said, but because we want to have more public transport in Outer London. And so I've explained in my answer some of the plans we have, and I'll be announcing more details over the course of the next few weeks.
That figure you gave, 9 out of 10 compliance, the Jacobs Integrated Impact Assessment, which was, I believe, published less than a year ago, showed that in Hounslow, compliance was as low as 58%. Has it really gone up to 90% in less than a year?
Well, I think you can look at the information published today and go back a year and see the progress made. I mean, I'd just remind you, in 2017, less than 4 out of 10 vehicles were compliant. That's now more than 94% in London. So we have seen big progress in our city, which has led to the record-breaking improvements in air quality we're seeing as well. Almost 50% reduction in NOx in central London, a further 20% in inner London. And with the expansion, further progress made in Outer London as well, where 5 million Londoners live and suffer the worst consequences of air pollution.
Moving on, one final question, Mr. Mayor. 3 weeks on now from People's Question Time. Hopefully you've had time to reflect. Do you now regret saying that those Londoners who are opposed to ULEZ expansion are, I quote, in coalition with the far right?
That's not what I said. What I said was quite clear, and I stand by
what you said, and we can send you the clip.
And I stand by what I saw. And I'm surprised if anybody thinks a swastika isn't far right. Anybody holding banners up with a swastika should be considered far right. There are people outside Ealing Town Hall with banners with a swastika, and I'd hope the member would condemn that unequivocally.
You said that those Londoners opposed to ULEZ expansion are in coalition with the far right. I'm deeply disappointed that you think such inflammatory and demeaning language directed at Londoners, directed at our constituents, is appropriate. Will you apologise for that?
I gave an invitation to the member to condemn the Nazis. He refused to do so.
There wasn't
and the reality, and then he's told by his neighbour they weren't Nazis even though they got a swastika. I find it astonishing that the resistant to condemn the far right, who are latching on to genuine Londoners with concerns about ULEZ, including genuine members of the Tory party, and they're latching on to this campaign, as they often do. And I don't understand why they won't condemn these far-right racists.
Deeply disappointing that you feel this sort of language is appropriate. Back to you, Chair.
I gave two opportunities for the Tories to condemn Nazis with swastikas. They denied both those opportunities.
Mayor, I want to press on. I have had two members who want to indicate who want to come on this issue. The first is Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much. Buses, as you've outlined, are key to outer London travel. Mr Mayor, when you took office, there were 489 million kilometres of bus services every year in London. In the last financial year, there were 470 million kilometres, a cut of 19.3 million kilometres. And similarly, over that same period, the number of operational London buses has been cut by 1,165, a staggering 11%. Isn't the reality that your promise of an additional million kilometres of buses in outer London is merely a tiny reversal of your own cuts to buses over 7 years?
No, because what the member doesn't do is give the context. She was a member of the Assembly when in 2015 the former mayor agreed with the former Chancellor to remove the operating grant from TfL. We've also had since 2016 not just the loss of the operating grant but the pandemic. So, not unsurprisingly, many Londoners stopped using buses and public transport. What we've had in London for a long period of time is the buses subsidised by the tube network. The profits made in the tube network has paid for the buses. As a condition of the funding deal with the government is now saying rather than that money from the tubes going towards paying for buses, we've now got to pay an additional £600 million, £500 million this year. So £500 million additional money we've got to pay in, which comes from tubes mainly, but also make cuts of more than £600 million. Notwithstanding all that, we've managed to improve public transport in parts of London. So rather than using buses, they use the Elizabeth line, they use the Northern Line extension, they use the more frequent Victoria line, they use the additional services by the night tube, by the night overground, by the night buses. So the member's not comparing apples with apples because of how London has changed over the last 5-6 years, but also ignoring the context of what we had the last 5-6 years. Notwithstanding all that, we have the biggest and most expansive bus route in Europe and the cheapest bus fares in the country.
Well, I think my figures stand. They are factually correct that there have been cuts to buses under your watch. But let's look at some outer London, South London boroughs. Let's look at the borough of Sutton. At both the January plenary meeting and the February budget meeting, you mentioned 2 new bus routes in Sutton. So tell me, what are these new routes?
Well, I'm happy to write to the memo to give examples of the routes.
Well, perhaps I can help then. It's simply not true to claim 2 new routes. In Sutton, the S2 is a newly numbered bus which basically replaces 2 existing routes, the 470 and parts of the S4. And any other proposals are simply tweaks that will do little to help mitigate the ULEZ expansion, which is really essential, and support residents to use public transport. So perhaps for the record, will there be any completely brand new bus routes in Sutton?
I'm astonished that the member is against increased frequencies or extension of bus routes and is simply advocating for new bus routes. I'm quite clear. In the 3 points that we're going to see improvements on, yes, new bus routes where we can. We know the challenges in relation to the consultation and it takes time to get those in. Increased frequencies where we can improves the confidence people have in using buses. but also extension of bus routes where we can as well. I'm more than happy. Listen, we've got more than 600 bus routes. I don't know all of them at the top of my head, but to write to the member to give her examples of the improvements we've seen in the last 5-6 years, but also the improvements we expect to see over the next few months.
The specific issue is TfL is claiming, you have said it twice yourself, in fact I challenged you and you said you would get back to me after our February budget meeting, that there will be brand new bus routes in Sutton, and it's not true. They are tweaks to additional existing buses. So given the importance of orbital travel, will you reverse your planned cut to the 213 bus from Kingston to Sutton, a proposed cut of around 100,000 kilometres per year?
I simply don't know the bus route the member's mentioning. I'm not,
Third time I've mentioned it to you in the last couple of months. I thought you might have read up on it, Mr. Mayor.
What the member could have done was ask the question on that number, and I could have got the research before Mayor's question time. I'm asked at least 100 questions during these 3 hours. The fact that I'd know a particular bus route is, I find, astonishing.
Well, I'd imagine in your briefing, given that I've raised it several times with you, Mr. Mayor, it would say 213 bus. These are the answers to the questions the member may well ask.
I'm more than happy to write to the member with the answer to the question in relation to the 213 bus route.
Now let's look at the borough of Richmond. Prior to the pandemic, bus usage in southwest London was rising. In fact, it was the only part of the capital where that was so. But in December 2020, you cut the 493, H22 and the H37, which has reduced residents' access to schools, hospitals and workplaces and led to overcrowding during rush hour. With the introduction of ULEZ less than 6 months away, will you reinstate these bus services?
I'm not aware of the bus she mentions, but obviously she's talking about a time when there was a pandemic and closures to Hammersmith Bridge, so more than happy for TfL to write to her in relation to the bus route she asked for.
What I'm asking is, will you look to reverse the cuts that you have made to buses in Richmond in recent years? We're beyond the pandemic now. You're introducing and expanding the ULEZ. We need to make sure there's an alternative to ensure people can get out of the car. Will you personally look to see whether you can reverse those cuts to improve those bus services?
Chair, as I said, I'll ensure something from TfL writes to the member in relation to the bus route
I'm asking you, Mr. Mayor, you're chair of TfL. I want you to take responsibility for this. Will you please personally look at the routes I've mentioned today in Sutton and Richmond and come back to me with a plan that will make sure there's an alternative to the car in those boroughs?
Chair, I'll ensure someone from TfL writes to the member in relation to the bus route she refers to.
You take no responsibility, Mr. Mayor. I am appalled by your answer. Instead of, you talk about overcoming voter cynicism by building coalitions across the political spectrum. The way you behave is exactly the opposite about that. And residents in outer London will be really concerned. They want more buses, not fewer buses, across the capital.
Okay, so Member Pigeon, you're out of time now. The next I want to bring is Assembly Member Prince. You can afterwards. I'll bring Assembly Member. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Morning.
Mr. Mayor, are you aware? I'm afraid I'm going to talk about bus routes again. I must say that in Havering, we do need more buses if we are going to make that transition from the car to public transport. We do need a north to south link, which, to be fair, with the extension of the 497, which you referred to in your notes, is taking place, and that is being heralded as a an improvement that will enable people such as Assembly Member Bailey to get from Harold Hill all the way down to Dagenham if he would so choose to do. But the problem is that amongst the changes that are being proposed to accommodate that, there is a reduction in the 346 route, and that will be down from 4 buses an hour down to 2. Really, one bus every half an hour is something you might expect in the sticks, not in a London borough. But worse than that, Mr. Mayor, and I know you do care about the elderly and disabled and so on, the 347 is actually being removed. That route is being removed. That will mean that elderly residents, because that is an area where there's a high proportion of elderly. The TfL's own equalities impact assessment says this change will disproportionately affect older people. That will mean they will have to walk an extra 600 metres. Now that's that magic figure that you mentioned, Mr. Mayor. So I would appeal to you that you ask your people to have a look at that for us, because if it is involving people having to walk a 600 extra metres, I know for me and you that may not be very much, but that you've yourself identified that is a key distance for less able people to travel. So would you be kind enough just to look into that, Mr. Mayor, please? Well,
that is worrying. Can I again ask the team to go and look into that and come back to me? I simply listen. I'll be criticised now in a moment for not knowing the details of 346 and 347. I just don't. You know, we've got 700 routes, but I'll get the TfL to go away and look into the particular case and write back to you. But it is worrying if what you're saying is true. So I'll ask them to look into that.
We're grateful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Assemblymember Deval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I mean, look, the opposition that we've had this morning, I do think we need to deconstruct some of it. Apart from some honourable exceptions from the Tories around it, they've never really been supportive of the bus service. Margaret Thatcher in herself said anyone who gets on a bus has to be, you know, poor or actually a failure. I think she described it as a failure. I do want to pick up the point that Assemblymember Pidgeon made, not about the individual advocacy, and I think you were right to resist giving any commitments there, but what I think there is a wider point is about choices and priorities on the new financial model that you have got to work within, with central government looking over your shoulders, and about where transport funding is. So I presume that when we come down to do the analysis of those routes, there are choices between you get better outcomes if you go down one route rather than the other. Are you able, do you not think TfL should be moving to a more transparent issue of where the people that advise you technically about where bus services go or not, we show people about those choices? Because it might be an argument about, is it a new bus route, or is it an extension, or is it increased frequencies? How do we get that across to people about some of the choices? Because we know we need to do better about the bus services in outer London, and we know certainly in some areas there are politicians that haven't been championed for bus services over the many years, who are only riding on the back of it to beat you over the head because they don't like you.
Well, I mean, you raise...
Because they don't like you. They don't like you.
The points you make are really important about understanding the context of public transport in London over a long period of time. I mean, losing an operating grant has consequences. A deal done by the government requiring you to make cuts of £5 million has consequences. Being asked to bring in additional revenues has consequences. And so we've got to be honest with Londoners about that. But it is a fact. We are expanding bus services in outer London. The easiest way to do it is by extensions, frequencies, and sometimes new bus routes. We also can't escape the fact that during the pandemic, fewer people, for understandable reasons, use public transport. If people are using buses less frequently, it's easy to reduce frequency, but also you can increase frequencies quicker once people want to use buses as well. And so we are trying to make sure we improve services all across our city. So we've had 500,000 kilometres of additional bus routes in outer London over the last year. Another additional 1 million kilometres up to August, unannounced in my budget, a further 1 million kilometres across all of London. But I'm not going to apologise in central London and in London, where we've now got a fantastic Elizabeth line. We've got duplicate buses running in central London to remove some of those buses to take them to outer London. And that's one of the things we're trying to do. But we do want to encourage people to walk, cycle, use public transport. Keith Prince raised a really good point in relation to older people. Clearly, a 5-minute walk is easier for Keith and I than it is for older people. So we're also trying to be nimble in relation to where the bus routes are. Many of our buses now, you will know this, almost 1 out of 6 buses you can hail without having a bus stop, right? Which is really important. So we're trying to be innovative in London. But I make this point, we know the context is, there's a budget last week, how much money for transport in London from the Chancellor? Answer, zilch.
Can I just go back to the other point? And I do think one of the honourable exceptions about talking up and defending buses has been that Assembly Member Prince on occasions. Now, let's return to this. I don't understand how the Conservatives can, on one hand, condemn the vandalism to CCTV cameras on the extension and all the issues, but not condemn those elements, those small elements that are part of the campaign against you, Les, that is about you, that target you personally because you're a Muslim, target you because they don't like you, and target you because the hatred they spill, whether they're anti-Semitic or issues or their conspiracy feelings about capitalism and Davos and who runs this country, why they can't condemn that element. And it may well be a small element, but actually it's an element that spreads poison within our society that isn't in favour of democracy, doesn't believe in democracy, and is outside the mainstream political parties. I don't understand why they can't condemn it.
What we can't escape, and it's just a fact, is in addition to the decent Tories who are outside Ealing Council protesting at the People's Question Time, and I use those words deliberately, decent Tories who for good reasons object to the ULEZ in their own mind, people with genuine concerns around ULEZ legitimately complaining about this outside of People's Question Time, latching onto them were people holding swastika banners. Latching onto them were anti-vaxxers. Latching onto them were COVID deniers. Latching onto them were conspiracy theories. There's not been a peep from the decent Tories I'm mentioning condemn them unequivocally. Instead, what they've done is they flipped it to play on the same, use the same misinformation to give the impression I'm saying everyone who opposes ULEZ is somehow part of the far right. That's not what I said. And I was quite clear. They are latching on to the campaigners. And, you know, I would hope the decent Tories call them out and say, listen, we don't want you joining our coalition. We don't want you part of this anti-ULEZ protest. Instead, they're not. Instead, they're not. And that's why you're right to call them out.
I've now heard indication from Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family. Can I just make this quite clear? The Conservatives are constantly berated by the Labour group here. Can I just remind everybody, we are here to scrutinise the Mayor, not to have a go at what other people say. And I'd like to put this on record, Mr. Mayor. We don't dislike you. We actually don't think you're a very capable mayor, and that's why we ask you difficult questions and are continually appalled that you don't know the answers. I'm going to leave it there because of our time, but I think actually having a go at your colleagues is not fitting for where we are today, and I'm very offended, may I say, by some of those comments.
Assemblymember Hall.
One minute and no condemnation of the Nazis of the far right. There you go. There you go.
I gave leeway to Assemblymember de Bell. He asked a question, and you answered. Hang on. And that's the end of it now. You've had your say on it, and I'm going to move on to the next question. The next question is the name of Assemblymember Mehmet. Local housing allowance freeze, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm deeply concerned that the government's decision to freeze local housing allowance rates will make it even more difficult for lower-income Londoners to access stable housing. I heard stark examples of the impact on renters of local housing allowance not being kept up with the cost of renting at the Private Renters Cost of Living Summit held in November. All Londoners must have access to safe, decent and stable housing. Current LHA rates are out of touch with the current rental market. Rents in London have increased by 16% in the last year, and in a recent survey, 40% of Londoners said they feared they'd struggle to pay their rent in the next 6 months. I'm deeply concerned about the freeze on LHA rates in the current cost of living crisis, placing severe pressure on the ability of lower-income Londoners to pay their rent. Not being able to afford rent puts households at risk of homelessness, and Shelters Still Living in Limbo research shines a light on the scale of the homelessness challenge in London. Londoners make up 6 in 10 of all households living in temporary accommodation, at increasing cost both to outcomes for those families and to local authority budgets. I'm therefore very disappointed that local housing allowance remains frozen at a rate set in April 2020, and I continue to call on the government to urgently increase LHA rates to the 50th percentile of market rents to reflect the actual costs of renting. The government missed another opportunity in the recent spring budget to end the LHA freeze and protect families from homelessness. The government must also urgently bring forward their long-delayed renters reform bill, introducing open-ended tenancies and abolishing Section 21 evictions so that renters have more stability in their homes. And the government must give me the powers to introduce an emergency 2-year rent freeze in London and devolve the power to implement rent controls in London to me, as set out in my blueprint for reforming private renting in London.
Thank you, Mayor Khan, and I'm really glad to be talking to you about something which matters in so many ways to Londoners, beyond, you know, the various conversations about ULEZ and those sometimes not exactly honest challenges to it. But the matter of housing is so fundamental to everything and everybody in our capital. So that number that you talked about with the affordability of homes in the capital and local housing allowance, only 9% of homes in London on the private market are actually affordable right now to people who are in receipt of local housing allowance, and that's, well, I think 125,000 households are at risk of homelessness. That is a massive number of people whose lives will be upended with a rent increase. Should it happen in the next few months. This is the period of the year when a lot of people move house. But my question is really, you know, how are we going to be making sure that we can kind of work with Michael Gove, who is, you know, I think one of our best hopes for changes to the sector, to make sure that there are those changes in the private rented sector so people have security. And I know that you have talked about a rent control and, you know, how that might support people who from month to month, every 6 months, are wondering whether or not their rents are going to be increased by 10, 15%, and they will be made homeless and go into that pool of people who are losing their homes.
So the reason why your original question is so important is because as rents are going up, those who receive housing benefit, that stayed the same. So the gap between the rent going up and the housing benefit has got bigger. And the government had a chance to increase the LHA, the amount of money people receive in housing benefit, to reduce that gap. The irony is this: the same MPs who are not giving tenants the benefit of a housing benefit increase themselves are claiming from taxpayers the increase in rent they pay as MPs in London. Right? This is one of life's delicious ironies. So it's okay for them to get taxpayers' money for the increase in rent they pay, but it's not okay for those Londoners who receive housing benefit and are working, by the way, to pay the difference. And I'm worried in relation to the consequences of rents going up, not additional support from the government, the impact on homelessness. You and I visited recently a brilliant work taking place in your constituency. You heard what they said. They could fill up 4, 5, 6 of those shelters with the pipeline of demand there is. And a lot of those people who end up on the streets are people who are working, they live somewhere, but they couldn't keep up with their rents, or made homeless. That's why it's so important. Yes, Michael Gove is dealing with the consequences, but if you can deal with the causes of this, that's really important.
Yeah. I'm out of time. Okay, thank you. I'm out of time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to propose that the Assembly now adjourns for 5 minutes and return at 11:33 so before continuing with the remaining agenda. So, has the member agreed with that? Great. Thank you. Let's press on, Mr. Mayor. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Hall. Is on the discretion with mayoral policies.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. We aim to ensure that all policies are applied fairly and appropriately, taking into consideration issues of equality, diversity and inclusion throughout the process of policy development and implementation. Where policies operate within a statutory or regulatory framework, any discretion around individual and particular cases can only be exercised so far as is allowed by the relevant regulations. Policies are designed to benefit as many Londoners as possible, whether that's our offer of universal free school meals for primary school children, our wider work to reduce food poverty, or our greening and rewilding policies. In most of these instances, the only discretion that can be applied is on where and how the policies and programmes are implemented, so will therefore be governed by GLA's own internal rules around grant funding, bid assessments and an analysis of need. We try hard to ensure policies cater to the majority of, if not all, people that may be affected by them. Mayoral strategies and major policy interventions are consulted on by the GLA or the relevant body, and this process is designed to ensure that our approach works for as many Londoners as possible, taking into account our commitments to equalities and the need to avoid adverse unintended consequences. Where we cannot implement programmes universally due to budgetary and other constraints, we always seek to use transparent and rigorous processes when deciding how and where resources are allocated. This is in line with the highest standards of best practice. Where the implementation of any of our policies has unintended consequences that our officers could not have foreseen, I'd of course encourage them to look at any particular circumstance on a case-by-case basis and use their discretion, so far as is possible, to mitigate against any undesirable outcomes. Of course, discretion should only be used within the spirit of the policy. It's important that Londoners maintain trust and confidence that the policies from City Hall are fair and are delivered without fear or favour. Everyone should be subject to the same rules. I'm confident there are fair and rigorous policy processes in place that ensure policies have a positive impact, applying discretion to ensure the spirit of the policy is achieved.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to clarify, this group clearly, the Conservative group, clearly condemn the far-right Nazis. Now, to go on to your question, or the question that you've answered. Last summer, Hounslow Council's deputy leader wrote to you asking for an exemption from the ULEZ for Hounslow Council vehicles. Were you surprised that the Hounslow Council asked for that delay?
I'm not aware of that particular delay, but I'm aware that during the consultation there are many views received, and those responses to the consultation form part of the analysis done by the independent company that went into the final report.
Oh, that's interesting, because I read it. It was in a few papers. Anyway, given that 67% of cars in Hounslow are non-compliant, shouldn't the real surprise be that Hounslow Council weren't pushing for a delay for all the vehicles, not just their own?
I'm not sure about the compliance figures in Hounslow or what they are now, but as I've said in answer to a previous question, I understand genuine concerns people may have, and that's why I'd encourage them to check whether their vehicle is compliant. If it's not compliant, whether they're eligible for the scrappage scheme that we've set out without any support from the government.
Do you not actually understand the hypocrisy of this? So the council approves of your dreadful extended ULEZ scheme. It asks you for exemption for itself, but thinks that their own residents should be paying it. Do you not see the hypocrisy in that?
Well, I can't speak to the individual circumstances, but there are discussions we've had with others over the years. So in 2017, 2018, we had conversations with the ambulance service, the fire brigade, the police. That's quite normal, and so it doesn't surprise me that councils want to check that their vehicles are compliant and so forth. And so I'm not clear what the issue is with councils wanting to check their vehicles are compliant and make in response to consultation.
No. They want you to give them exemptions. They basically, Hounslow Council, I think they're run by Labour, they have asked you for exemptions for their council vehicles. I'm saying to you, do you not think that is hypocritical, bearing in mind they've supported this dreadful extended ULEZ scheme of yours, bearing in mind that they've supported that despite the fact that 67% of their residents have got non-compliant vehicles, and yet had the cheek to then ask you to give them an exemption, not their residents, them, for their council vehicles until they replace them.
Same old Labour. No, because we entered into a memorandum of understanding with, for example, the ambulance service. The NHS is very much in favour of these policies, the health practitioners are. But we came to an agreement with some of those who needed longer lead-in times when we first embarked on this process. So that I think the issue of people wanting to make sure their vehicles are compliant is a good one. We're trying to make sure we bring in the ULEZ this August all across London, and councils during the consultation will not unreasonably put in responses. I'm not sure what the criticism is they're putting in response to consultation.
Well, this perhaps reflects why I said we don't think you're a capable mayor. If you don't understand the difference between the ambulance service and a council who are put in there by their residents, they're not standing up for their residents who've got 67% of non-compliance. No, they're looking after themselves and asking for exemptions for themselves, the council, not their residents. Do you not see that in any way as being wrong?
Well, they probably aren't eligible for a scrappage scheme, I suspect, and the residents, and businesses and charities are.
You obviously don't see it or understand it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assemblymember Garrett. It's on the duty of candour.
Thank you, Chair. The truly abhorrent offences of David Carrick and Wayne Cousins, as well as many other cases, highlight how the current system of preventing and addressing offences by serving police officers is not fit for purpose. Officers are currently required to cooperate with investigations, but there is no formal duty for them to proactively report wrongdoing they witness being committed by others. Profound changes to police vetting, conduct and misconduct processes are urgently needed to restore the bond that is so vital to policing by consent and supporting victims, particularly women and girls. To support this, I've written to the Home Secretary about introducing a new duty of candour in the police force, which should put a positive and legal onus on officers to report wrongdoing as soon as they see fit. The implementation of a duty of candour was first proposed by the National Police Chiefs Council in response to the Hillsborough Families report. It was also recommended by the independent panel that looked into the Daniel Morgan case. The police serve a specific function that means trust and confidence in them is vital to allow them to carry out their jobs. Police officers are in the unique and privileged position of having the discretion to use a significant range of powers to protect and serve the public. When trust in the police is low, the public can fear that these powers are open to abuse, and we have seen many terrible incidents where that has been the case. Introducing a duty of candour would help ensure that where that is happening, other officers have the duty to speak out, which will also help give officers the confidence and authority to do so. This does not apply in the same way to the other parts of the GLA family, although I of course expect all GLA employees to call out issues where they see them, and I hope they feel supported to do so. Nevertheless, I am proud to have run the most transparent mayoralty London has ever seen. In the first 4 years of my mayoralty alone, we responded to over 4,500 Freedom of Information requests, more than the previous mayor in his 8 years in office. We publish interests and gift declarations for me and my mayoral advisors, as well as details of senior officer responsibilities and salaries. We also publish gender, ethnicity and disability pay gaps, which go beyond what is statutorily required of us.
Thank you. I think opinion would differ as to whether you're the most transparent mayor ever, but I think we would all agree about the importance of the issues you've raised with the police. We had obviously a very long session of the police and crime yesterday, but my question was about that duty of candour, which seems very sensible, and how that would apply elsewhere in the GLA family. And I'm thinking specifically in relation to your Vision Zero safety, road safety plan, which is a very bold plan. Getting to zero is very difficult. And I'm thinking but specifically in relation to bus safety, bus operators, and the reporting of information of incidents. So, for example, at the December TfL board meeting, the Commissioner in his report highlighted 2 bus safety incidents. But we run at about 50 or 60 people hospitalised per month by or on London buses. And even just the 2 that he highlighted, serious though they were, on those same days, in each case there was another incident where someone else was hospitalised on the same day, and that didn't appear anywhere in his report. So do you think, on that important safety critical issue, there is enough transparency, enough candour about the problems, the safety issues on London buses, and therefore a drive to really tackle that to get to zero?
So thank you for your question. So in particular, since the Sandilands tram incident in 2016, all members of the TfL board and all those members of the commissioners, the previous commissioners' management team, understand that safety is an issue that is always discussed first at every meeting. So what you saw was simply the commissioner's report, which for obvious reasons is going to be a précis summary of some of the things that are for his mind. I just want to reassure the member that there are at least 2 committees with members from the non-exec team, but also the exec team, who look at these issues, not just in buses, other parts of public transport, including where there are transferable issues. So you'll be aware and know that some of the lessons from the trams have been used on the buses in relation to fatigue and so forth. So the TfL does take it seriously, and safety is an issue we discussed.
Well, you say he was as a précis, so that was the December meeting, so it would have been a précis of safety issues in October and November. He mentioned 2 bus incidents in October. As I say, in fact, there were 63, by my reckoning, 63 people hospitalised by buses just in October. In November, there was a fatality in Merton. Would it not have made sense to bring that to the board's attention as part of his précis? If it was my précis, I would have put that front and centre.
The Commissioner does normally mention fatalities. He was before you yesterday, day before yesterday, so I'm sure you raised it with him. I don't write the Commissioner's report, the Commissioner writes his report, but the reassurance I want to give you is that there is a committee on the TfL board, a subcommittee that looks into the issue of safety in all public transport, including buses.
Okay, I mean, the concern I'm raising is that you've set this, very high bar, or very low bar, I suppose, of 0. Anyone who's worked in an operational environment, which I did before I did this, 0 is a very hard number to hit. It requires a real focus and dedication. So, do you not think it would be consistent with that to have these issues flagged much more prominently, not just in a subcommittee? I've sat on subcommittees. They're not all, they're where issues go to die. In particular, what I would like, here's my request, that in the Commissioner's report, there is at least a summary of the number of people hospitalised and the number of people killed in the period that he's covering, and that where there is a KSI, somebody hospitalised or somebody killed, there is a précis of every incident published, so that people who are looking at this from outside TfL can understand the issues and can spot what's going on and bring some transparency.
Well, my understanding is that does take place. The TfL committee papers are on the TfL website, but I'll take this point away. I'm sorry it wasn't raised with the Commissioner when it was before a subcommittee of the Assembly, which I don't think is where things go to die.
It's not a subcommittee, that's a committee. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. So you've committed to look at it. I will commit to write to you in a month asking what's happened in that month.
I'm grateful.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is the name of Assembly Member Cooper. It's on the Inner London ULEZ one-year report. What more can be done?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. The Inner London ULEZ one-year report, which was independently reviewed by experts, shows the ULEZ and expansion have been hugely successful. The ULEZ and LEZ schemes are reducing the number of older, more polluting vehicles seen driving in London, helping to reduce harmful roadside nitrogen dioxide by half in central London and over 1/5 in Inner London. I can confirm today that now 90% of cars, 9 out of 10 cars driving out of London, are compliant with ULEZ. In 2017, it was less than 4 out of 10. But there is still far too much toxic air pollution permanently damaging the health of young Londoners and leading to thousands of early deaths every year, with the greatest number of deaths in outer London boroughs. The ULEZ expansion is forecast to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions from cars and vans in outer London by 10 and 7% respectively, and PM2.5 car exhaust emissions in outer London by nearly 16%. In absolute terms, the London-wide expansion is expected to save 362 tonnes of NOx emissions in 2023, compared to 230 tonnes saved by the central ULEZ in its first year, and 23,000 tonnes of CO2 compared to the estimated 12,300 tonnes saved in the first year of the central ULEZ. Expanding the ULEZ London-wide will mean 5 million more people will be able to breathe cleaner air and live healthier lives. To maximise the benefits of the expansion to ULEZ and strengthen alternatives to private car use, I've also announced a massive expansion of the bus network in outer London. Alongside the ULEZ, TfL is cleaning up the bus and taxi fleets, delivering electric vehicle infrastructure and making it easier and safer to walk and cycle. I'm also tackling non-transport sources of air pollution, including through the London-wide non-road mobile machinery low emission zone, new air quality guidelines in the London Plan, and working with the boroughs to improve enforcement and awareness of wood burning. But road transport is the largest individual source of both NOx and local PM2.5 emissions, and one of the greatest contributors to carbon dioxide emission in London. That's why expanding the ULEZ London-wide is such a vital part of building a better, greener, fairer and healthier London for everyone.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I'd like, if I may, just to focus in on the issue of particulate matter. I think the figures for the reductions in terms of NOx and CO2 resulting from the central and then the inner London ULEZ are good. But I still think there's more that we need to be doing around particulate matter, both 2.5 and 10. How much do you think the introduction of the ULEZ, the low emission buses and zero emission capable taxis and electric vehicle charging points, so hopefully rolling out into private vehicles where people are still choosing to use vehicles, how much has that contributed to cleaning up the air of particulate matter?
Yes, it's a really important point. That's why when we talk about toxic air, it's not just nitrogen oxide, nitrogen dioxide, but also PM2.5 and PM10 you mentioned as well. So the good news is, and you're part of the lobbying and campaigning in relation to Putney High Street, but the fact that all our buses are Euro 6 compliant means that we've reduced PM2.5, PM10 from our buses. The ULEZ in Central London and Inner London has reduced the PM2.5 and PM10 from HE vehicles as well as buses, vans and so forth. And the projections are there'll be a further big reduction in relation to PM2.5 if we expand the ULEZ. The estimate is PM2.5 emissions have reduced by 180 tonnes across London with the ULEZ, and we're able to go even further with the expansion. Just one point though, that's transport sources of PM2.5. You know from conversation we've had outside this chamber, there are other causes of PM2.5 as well.
Well, you lead very nicely into the area that I wanted to ask you about. You've talked about some things you have quite a lot of direct control over, licensing of taxis and the buses that we use, and introducing controls over the ultra-low emission zone and things like that. But wood-burning stoves are now starting to become a much, much bigger problem. And I wondered if you would join with me to write to Trace Coffey to ask if the Clean Air Act can be strengthened. I know this was something you called for on its anniversary in 2016, to actually think much more seriously about restricting the use of wood-burning stoves. We need to have some much tougher action. I think it's really undermining some of the work that you're doing in terms of cleaning up London's air.
Absolutely. The problem is the more we reduce PM2.5 from transport, the bigger proportion is being done by the wood-burning stoves and all the rest of it and stuff. And so unless the government takes action on this, that'll be responsible for nearly all the PM2.5 in our city. So, look, I'm happy to write to the Secretary of State. Maybe I could write with you to lobby on these points in relation to this. Local authorities need more powers, more resources. There's an issue in relation to the emission standards when they're sold and so forth. So let's take that away and see what we can do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assemblymember Plansky on retrofits skills.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. No. Neither we in London nor towns and cities across the country have enough skilled workers to deliver the retrofit revolution. The Independent Green Jobs Task Force estimated the UK needs an increase of 230,000 trained workers by 2030 to retrofit every building in the UK. Element Energy's analysis of my preferred pathway for London to achieve net zero by 2030 estimates that 56,000 jobs will be needed by 2025 just to insulate our homes and install heat pumps and district heating. In 2021, 4,000 people worked on retrofit projects in London, so there's a long way to go. This is a huge challenge, but also an opportunity to create jobs and increase the skills of existing workers, as well as bring new entrants into the sector who are representative of London's diverse communities. London is leading the way in this country. My green skills hubs and academies are helping grow the decarbonisation supply chain needed to support the successful deployment of heat pumps. In 21-22, London's AEB education budget contributed over £33 million towards green skills. Nearly £4 million was spent on technical green skills directly linked to decarbonising. Around £60 million was spent on supporting green skills required by electricians, carpenters and other roles that are seeing increased demand. But the government must play its part too. A long-term national programme of green skills support is best delivered at a regional level to ensure the pipeline of skills meets local need. This requires more devolution of powers to a regional level. Alongside this, I've repeatedly called on the government to commit to a long-term multi-billion-pound funding for domestic and commercial sector building decarbonisation rather than the short-term, single-year, single-measure programmes we have to piece together now. Last week's budget made tentative, slow steps forward with some devolved funding for West Midlands and Greater Manchester combined authorities, not today, but in 2025. But even this is heavily caveated and constrained by the existing arrangements. The devolution we need must include additional skills funding to meet demand. Longer-term programmes have the potential to rapidly build demand, support local supply chains, boost job creation and create market confidence.
Thank you. This sounds like a change in tone from when I asked you about this in November. Then you said to me that this was a chicken and egg problem. What we need is some certainty there are jobs to go to. Now, London Borough's got £18 million from the government, and since we last spoke in February, data showed that they've only managed to retrofit 36 homes. 36. The Chartered Institute of Housing say the problem here is a national retrofit skills shortage. So what made you think back then that there aren't the jobs to go to?
There aren't the jobs to go to. There aren't the employers willing to take on people coming through the skills being provided. So when you compare and contrast America, the Inflation Reduction Plan is a scheme of £370 billion, which has created certainty and created demand. We've got nothing like that in London. And so a young person or an older person entering a course wants to be confident when they finish the course there'll be a job to go to. Employers will only take on more people if they're certain of the work coming through. And that's why it's really important for FE colleges and those in the AB sector to carry on work talking to employers, where employers are saying they're not willing to take on big numbers of people yet because of lack of confidence in the demand for the work.
But in terms of that confidence, London councils have said London needs 110,000 people working in retrofit by 2030. You rightly called for a retrofit revolution, but currently there's only 4,000. That's a huge shortfall. So do you have a target of how many people you're planning to train in retrofit skills per year from now until 2030?
So the way the AEB model works is the providers, when they bid for contracts, look at the demand there is, and they speak to employers as well in relation to demand. What we don't want to do is what's happened in the past, which is some in this sector have people going through doing courses, receiving certificates, and there being no jobs to go to. We want to make sure that there is, tied with the skills being learned, jobs being created that are sustainable going forward. So the AEB sector is very nimble, very dexterous. They can move very quickly. So as long as there is an appetite from employers, they'll carry on moving. So some parts of London, some of the providers have moved to provide these courses, and others will do so once they know there's an appetite.
So on these courses, I'm still waiting for a list of providers you fund that deliver retrofit training. You said you'd send me that in November, but I've still not received it. Moving on, though, you've got a Green Skills Academy quality mark. This went to 6 colleges. They've received £50 million from you. Do you know if any of them offer retrofit or insulation courses?
It's just worth reminding you that often there are other courses which lead you to be able to retrofit. So the label retrofit shouldn't limit your thinking what colleges are doing. So colleges do other stuff, for example, in relation to plumbing, in relation to other electricians. Some of this stuff helps in relation to retrofit. And so as it is, in 21-22, there are 6,000 qualifications being done by 5,000 learners. And that will, I'm sure, increase going forward. That's limited, though, to the heat pumps, solar power, and electrical skills linked with green skills. But there are other courses colleges are doing that leads to these people going on to get jobs in this industry.
This is all good stuff, but you know very well this isn't retrofitting. In your Green Skills Academy quality mark that's gone to 6 colleges, not a single one offers retrofit or installation courses. Capital City don't do it, Harrow and Uxbridge don't do it, London Skills and Development, Newham College, Waltham Forest College, West London College, not a single one offers retrofit or installation courses. And those are your gold standard colleges for green skills.
But this is the point which you have difficulty accepting the chicken and the egg. The colleges will provide the courses when there's certainty from the employers and students wishing to do so. But it's also worth reminding that the retrofit skills are also skills that overlap from other courses that people can do. And so what students are doing, I suspect, is hedging, doing skills that can lead to other jobs if there's not a demand for employers for retrofit.
I'm out of time, but 36 homes were retrofitted with £18 million. There is demand. We need leadership on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the next question is in my name, and I've been cheering my own self and not pushing up and not pushing up the agenda, because it is about ULEZ and buses in outer London.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to show that I do show constraint when I'm cheering. But can you please answer my question, which is in my name on the bus investment in outer London?
Well, we'll be the judge of whether you chair your question fairly, Chair. I'm proud to have announced an ambitious plan for improving the bus network and delivering an increase of more than 1 million extra kilometres in outer London ahead of the expansion of the ULEZ London-wide in August. This is in addition to the 1 million new kilometres I announced last November, including plans for the new 304 route in Newham, extensions of routes to Lewisham, Pontoon Dock, Dagenham Park Square and Royal Wharf. As part of this work, TfL has recently launched 4 consultations on extensions of routes to key growth areas or town centres and more direct and frequent services. These proposals are in Brent Cross, Harold Wood, Upminster, Stonebridge Park and Tooting. Proposals to redesign bus routes around Wembley Park and Wembley Stadium were also published last week, and TfL continues to plan further improvements to the outer London network. These improvements will broaden the alternatives to private car use and make it easier to get around key parts of outer London by public transport. As well as new and improved bus routes, TfL is introducing a range of other improvements as part of its bus action plan to make bus travel in London better and faster. This includes trialling high-power fast charging technology on route 358 between Crystal Palace and Orpington, which will enable buses to cover a greater distance without having to return to the garage to recharge. TfL is also working with boroughs to introduce 25 kilometres of new and improved bus priority by 2025 and has confirmed plans to increase real-time journey information across the city, including over 300 new countdown signs. There are already around 900 zero-emission buses in London, and TfL is committed to converting the whole fleet by 2034. This target could be brought forward to 2030, subject to government funding. Buses play a crucial role in making London a more prosperous and connected city, and these increased and improved services will help encourage more people to use public transport ahead of the ULEZ expansion in November.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. During the earlier exchange, I realised that you understand that the impact the ULEZ will have on outer London and the need to improve a bus transport system. But are you being hampered in any way by the government-imposed TfL financial settlement impacting on the expansion of bus services in London? Is something hampering you?
It's a big problem. So last year, for example, the government required us to cut buses in central London and in London. I found money from the GLA. So the GLA paid. It's a really important point that London Val made in relation to the context. The GLA is giving £25 million to TfL to continue running buses in central London and in London that would have been cut. The GLA is giving TfL a funding facility of £500 million because of conditions attached by the government in relation to the funding deal. The government is requiring TfL to make savings of £600 million on top of the £1.1 billion that I've had to do over the next 2 years. So we've got to find £600 million from somewhere over the next 2 years. And on top of that, we've got to raise revenues by more than £500 million. So it is very tough. But I'm determined to make sure we provide additional public transport to those in London, particularly those in outer London. But I'm doing it with not one but 2 hands tied behind my back from this government.
Great. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are issues about some buses in Rustbridge and Linden, but I'll pick it up with the office offline. So I'll leave that. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is in the name of is in the same member of Assembly Fortune, but it'll be taken by Assembly Member Garrett. It's on car ownership in London.
Thank you, Chair. London's poorest households are least likely to own a car. 78% of households that earn less than £10,000 do not own a car. 64% of households that earn between £10,000 and £19,999 don't own a car. In outer London, 70% of households that earn less than £10,000 annually do not own a car, and 53% of households that earn between £10,000 and £19,999 do not own a car. London's poorest households are also more likely to be affected by the impacts of toxic air caused by traffic and congestion. It is estimated that the most deprived areas of London experience average concentrations of nitrogen dioxide that are 13% higher than the least deprived areas. Cleaning up our air is a matter of social justice. The data for 2021 and 2022 shows that a higher proportion of ULEZ PCNs are issued by TfL to keepers of cars registered in outer London than inner London. This is likely because the ULEZ does not yet cover the areas of London where these people live, so until recently, these people might not have thought to register to pay on autopay, be as aware of the ULEZ to pay the charge, or about applying for the scrappage schemes and upgrading their vehicles. This is brought out by the fact that a much higher proportion of ULEZ PCNs are issued to people who live outside of London, around 52% of all PCNs in 21-22. Toxic air leads to around 4,000 Londoners dying prematurely each year, with the out-London boroughs of Bromley, Barnet, Croydon and Havering seeing the most premature deaths attributable to air pollution. Expanding the ULEZ London-wide is forecast to combat air pollution by reducing nitrogen oxide emissions. It will also save 27,000 tonnes of CO2 in outer London, nearly double that which the Central London ULEZ achieved in its first year of operation. As a result of these changes, the 5 million residents of outer London will breathe cleaner air. I am deeply concerned, though, about the impact of the cost of living crisis on Londoners, and that's why I launched the biggest ever scrappage scheme, dedicating £110 million to supporting the poorest Londoners, as well as those on lower incomes, disabled Londoners, charities, sole traders and micro businesses to replace or retrofit their polluting vehicles or seek alternative, greener forms of travel. I'm also providing further support by removing the annual £10 per vehicle autopay registration fee. This has made it easier for people with non-compliant vehicles to pay and avoid incurring a penalty charge.
So, exactly a year ago, March last year, Assemblymember Fortune asked you about the claim that you have made repeatedly that the poorest Londoners do not own cars, and that exchange between you and him descended into acrimony, with you mocking him for the very idea that the poorest Londoners might own cars. I've got the transcript here. Mayor of London says, "I'm surprised that the member's experience does not lead him to conclude that the poorest Londoners cannot afford to own cars." So do you stand by that claim, that statement?
I just read the numbers out. 78% of those who live in our city who earn below £10,000 don't own a car. 87% of those who earn below £10,000.
So you're saying some of the poorest Londoners do own
inner
cars?
London
Is that what
don't
you're
own a
saying?
car. 70% in outer London. A small minority of poorer Londoners do own a car. We're talking about 13% in inner London, 30% in outer London, and 22% in outer London. By anybody's definition, that's a minority.
Okay, well, I welcome your shift in position following my extensive fact-checking. So we did ask you, or Assemblymember Fortune did ask you for figures, which you didn't really send, but helpfully your Walking and Cycling Commissioner on the 7th of March tweeted out this very useful and informative chart, which shows a breakdown of car ownership by income decile, so that people divided into 10 groups by income, and really helpfully it shows levels of car ownership in central London and inner London and outer London, and it's a tale of two cities. And what it shows is that the lowest income decile in outer London are more likely to own a car than the highest income decile in inner London. Do you recognise that fact?
So in outer London,
yes,
70% of households who earn below £10,000 don't own a car, and for those between £10,000 and £19,999.
Okay, so you're just repeating the same figures. The lowest decile, it doesn't have on here. I've chased up with his office for the source of this information, and 2 weeks on, they've not yet managed to supply it to me for some reason. It's a TfL branded infographic, so it's clearly official information. What it shows is in the lowest decile, which I don't know what income band that is, but in the lowest decile, the poorest 10% of Londoners in outer London, a majority of those households own a car, and they are more likely to own a car. Even the lowest income decile in outer London, more likely to own a car than the highest income decile in inner London. So this is why your ULEZ policy has such a different impact on people, has such a different public reaction. You know, do you recognise that this picture of a city that is so different, inner versus outer, is something that you didn't really understand a year ago when you were berating Assemblymember Fortune? And do you now recognise that outer London is just very different in this regard?
So we've always accepted that outer London is different, which is why we're expanding public transport in outer London. We've also had a massive increase in relation to...
I mean, it's not a massive increase in buses, it's a 0.2% increase in buses. You're answering a different question. Do you recognise that in outer London, the poorest Londoners in outer London are more likely to own a car than the wealthiest Londoners in inner London?
Well, let me answer the previous question first. Before
it's the same question I've asked you repeatedly, and you've not answered it.
So let me ask the previous question, which is what we've always recognised is outer London is different to inner and central London, which is why we've got the massive scrappage scheme. We're increasing public transport in outer London, but you can't escape the fact that 70% of those who earn below £10,000 in outer London don't own a vehicle. So a combination of most vehicles are compliant, most poorer Londoners who living out of London don't own a vehicle, but also the scrappage scheme, in addition to increased public transport, supports those very small numbers of people who many support.
Okay, the facts that you're repeatedly quoting are directly contradicted by your Walking and Cycling Commissioner, but having established that the Mayor is out of touch with Outer London as usual, I will leave it there, Chair.
Thank you for that, Assemblymember Garrett.
He's as stroppy as Boris Johnson yesterday, isn't he?
Okay. I'm trying to chair this. I'm trying to chair this impartially so far.
Oh, then chair it impartially.
I am.
Go for it.
Next question is by Assemblymember Prince. It's on young people in Redbridge.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. Young people are at the heart of everything I do because I know from my own experience how transformative positive early interventions can be. Over the last month alone, I announced that I'm investing £130 million to provide primary school children with free school meals in the next academic year, helping families through the cost of living crisis. Ensuring our children have access to at least one healthy meal a day will also better equip them to learn. This emergency programme will benefit around 270,000 children across London, saving families around £440 per child across the year. That means around 13,000 extra children in Redbridge will get a healthy lunch each day for free. I'm calling on the government to match this support in future years and across the whole country. I also announced last week a new £19.5 million community sports fund to help underserved and vulnerable young Londoners access sport and physical activities. The Go London Fund, which is open for organisations in Redbridge and across the city to bid for now, will support young Londoners facing physical, social, economic or educational challenges. And a new £1.1 million collaboration between City Hall and the NBA will support the training of 500 basketball coaches over 3 years, providing training, coaching and mentoring to 20,000 young Londoners, including in Redbridge. Alongside this, my Violence Reduction Unit has invested in 150,000 positive opportunities for young people through education, training, youth work and employment. Through the VRU, I've invested in programmes for young people in Redbridge, including healthy relationships, training in schools, mentoring for children in alternative education and safe and accessible after-school activities. I've also committed to helping 100,000 young people in greatest need to access mentoring opportunities by 2024. In Redbridge, this includes Lifeline's Switch Futures project, which is reaching 600 young people through sport. This builds on my Young Londoners Fund, through which over 1,900 young people benefited from in Redbridge. Redbridge is part of the London Careers Hub, which works with 22 schools, AV colleges, pupil referral units and special schools to develop their careers programmes. This helps ensure that young people of Redbridge are better equipped to make informed decisions about their futures.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, I appreciate that you do care about young Londoners and you've demonstrated that. But unfortunately, and very regrettably, that we've seen an increase in knife injury victims in Redbridge, moving up from 29 in 21 to 49 in 22. I know you did come and visit the borough. I met you there, although I wasn't invited. But this is obviously very serious. The council are currently proposing to close the last remaining youth centre in Redbridge. It's in Wanstead, and unfortunately they've only given 3 months' notice of the proposed closure. They are doing a consultation, but we know that the revenue stream for that particular building has already been taken away in their latest budget. Now, you and I both get on well with the leader, Jazz Atwell. I wonder whether you could just use your offices, Mr. Mayor, to have a quiet word and see if there's any way that we can help to keep this youth centre going. It's only going to cost £100,000 a year, which, that's a lot of money, but in the greater scheme of things. But it really is important that in Redbridge we keep our young people engaged and we keep them on the straight and narrow.
Well, Chair, can I ask the member to get in touch with my office after the MQTs and I'll look into the particular youth club, but also can I agree with him about how serious youth violence is in his community. I visited his community and I've seen the consequences of violent crime in his community, and I've got the numbers here, and each number is a person and a family and affected. And the Redbridge numbers, although they're going down, it's no consolation you're the victim of crime, right? And so, you know, there was last year one homicide below the age of 25, which is one too many. So if I, with your permission here, can just speak to the member outside, and we'll see what I don't know about the details of the particular youth club, and I'll see what I can do.
Appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Clark. It's on the wildfires this summer.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your question. Last July, London experienced the impacts of extreme weather conditions in a way we never have before. I'm grateful to the London Fire Brigade for the heroic work tackling the wildfires that resulted from that extreme heat. Tragically, some Londoners lost their homes and everything they owned in those devastating fires. With the sad likelihood that these types of incidents will become more frequent as the impacts of climate change increase, the LFB is finalising a major incident review identifying lessons that will improve preparedness and response. Some improvements have already been made, from small things like providing rehydration sachets to firefighters to bigger changes like the introduction of mandatory training on fighting wildfire. The LFB is also considering improvements in the way it communicates safety messaging to the public. Over the course of the heatwave last summer, the brigade led messaging to the public about the risk of grass fires and how Londoners could take actions to keep safe. This included asking people to dispose of their litter responsibly, put out cigarettes properly, and avoid using barbecues in open spaces or on balconies. This work will continue this year, and as we move towards summer, the brigade will focus communications around the risks of dry weather, incorporating the lessons from the major incident last year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family, and also just to say how great it was to see you switching on the Ramadan lights, which we had in Finchley a few years ago, so it's fantastic to see that. So we obviously have a fire brigade who are used to dealing with fires in an urban environment, and these wildfires are a step change from what they've been fighting before, and certainly the scale of wildfires is very, very different than fighting urban fires. How is the LFB seeking to learn from fire and rescue services outside of London who are more used to wildfires?
Yes, a cracking question. I had a meeting this week with the London Fire Commissioner and his team, and I was gobsmacked at the amount of work they're having to do now, right? Because you think we live in London. But I think that what last summer taught us, if we needed to be taught, is we're seeing the consequences of climate change. So the fire service do a number of things in London. They're working with those colleagues around the country who've got more experience of this on the National Fire Chiefs Council. There's something called the Wildfire Lead Officers. There's 25 fire services who work closely in that, and so they're taking part in the incident review. Separately, the research and development part of LFB are talking to colleagues even as far away as Australia and the USA to see what lessons we can learn there. It's really important for us to realise that actually there's going to be more of these fires happening. And that's why what I said in my answer is really important as well about the prevention side as well. So the LFB is doing what they can, learning on the what you do with it, what you do when a fire starts, but also what lessons we can learn to avoid fires happening in the first place as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned disposable barbecues, which my colleagues will know is a particular favourite topic of mine. But I'm just wondering, so the LFB is obviously seeking to educate the public on the dangers of disposable barbecues. But what about safer alternatives? Is that something that the London Fire Brigade is going to be promoting?
Well, first, listen, I love the London Fire Brigade, as we all do. We can't expect them to do everything. Yeah. And so what they're doing is working with the British Retail Consortium about the very issue you raised. Look, the LFB doesn't want to be a party pooper, all right? So when they say don't jump into a wild lake or a reservoir, it's not because they don't want you to cool down, but because it's dangerous. When they say don't have a disposable barbecue when there's an open space, it's not because they don't need to have fun with your family and friends, but because a little thing can spread, particularly when grass is dry. It's like hay. And so they're doing the education side because we trust them as experts. But they're working with the retailers to try and see if there are alternatives, disposable barbecues that are safe, those sorts of issues. And that's why conversations with colleagues overseas is helpful, because their temperatures are higher more of the time and they may be ahead of us in relation to this. So rather than reinvent the wheel, can we learn from overseas? But we do need to think about whether this issue is an important one, but also think about e-bikes. Again, our fire service is putting out fires caused by e-bikes, lithium batteries, but actually others, retail sector, government regulation need to help us in this area, because I'm afraid, just like with last summer with disposable barbecues causing more fires, the evidence shows with more lithium batteries there are more fires being caused by those as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member Clark. Can I also welcome Assembly Member Kripesh Irani, who looks far too relaxed for a person who's been on paternity leave. And the next question is in his name on Mayor's Health and Care Academies.
Well, Chair, I was going to say he looks more sleep deprived than I do, and so welcome back from paternity leave. Chair, our Skills Academies programmes was established to support the Londoners hardest hit by the pandemic into good work into sectors key to London's recovery and long-term economic growth, including the health and social care sector. Launched in January 2022, I allocated £46 million across the Academy's programme, which initially included 22 hubs across the capital. 3 of the hubs cover the health sector in the North East, North West and South West London Integrated Care System, ICS. The 3 health hubs have supported almost 2,000 Londoners into training and employment, with just over 1,500 Londoners entering employment, apprenticeships or paid work placements paying at least the London living wage. In the past year, I've secured additional funding in partnership with Health England to provide hubs in the remaining 2 ICS sub-regions, delivering pan-London coverage for the health sector. We launched the 2 new health hubs along with 5 social care hubs last week. Alongside this, approximately £1.5 million from the European Social Fund is funding 3 health and social care academies, supporting 875 learners to receive employability guidance and progress into training, education or employment. I'm also supporting the health and social care sector through my adult education budget, with 33,570 learners participating in health and care courses in 21-22, and we're funding 7 health and social care skills boot camps to support Londoners with training to move into good work.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And a key objective of the Academies programme is to support Londoners into overcoming some of the barriers into these sectors and to make sure that they have entry into the 5 specific sectors. The NHS vacancy rate is at record levels, and London has seen the highest vacancy rate of any other region across the country at 12%. So I'm glad that you have taken the initiative to identify this as a sector that badly needs our support in the absence of government leadership. And even though it's not a statutory responsibility for yourself around health and social care, City Hall is stepping in. In addition to addressing the vacancies crisis, one thing that is also important that the Health Committee saw during a recent visit to the London Ambulance Service is the diversity of the workforce as well. And this was recognised by the Ambulance Service itself in its impending 2023 to 2028 strategy. Are your academies helping to increase diversity in the health and care sector?
It's a really important point, how you turn a problem into an opportunity, and we're trying to do that. The first thing is, look, even with the best one in the world, we're not going to be able to fill the vacancies there are, and so we're lobbying the government to have a regional shortage occupation list to bring back some of the EU workers who have lost, who left, and the NHS and social care sector has lost. So we are. So we're working with the AEB sector to make sure there are proper targets in relation to getting underrepresented groups into doing these courses, and out the other side getting into jobs. As I said, 64% of Londoners entering employment, paid work placements, are from Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups. Really important. We're doing that, 1. But 2, you're right that we should make sure that the Academy's programme has targets, and the targets we've got are, we want 62% to be from ethnic minority backgrounds, 54% to be female participants, and it goes to something that Caroline raised earlier on in a different context, 25% to be deaf and disabled participants as well. So, and that includes, and neurodiversity is included as well in relation to making sure we use the opportunity provided by the vacancies to make sure all Londoners have access to these skills.
Thank you. And it's quite interesting you mentioned the European Social Fund in your initial response to me, and the occupation, the shortage occupation list as well, because clearly Brexit is having an impact on staffing in the NHS. I mean, far from taking back control, it looks like we've lost control of the NHS with this government. How important is it that we get this immigration policy and a relationship with the European Union correct for the sake of our NHS?
Yeah, well, there was some good news in construction in relation to the budget. So what Jeremy Hunt announced is that for the shortage occupation list, he's going to allow 4 subcategories of construction, because he's recognised that we can't build these homes or fix the defects when there's not enough people in the construction sector, even if we have a pipeline of people going through the academies. And so there was some change there. There's no change, I'm afraid, in relation to the other areas, and I think it's a big mistake for the government in relation to record numbers of vacancies. We know that many EU workers have gone back to country of origin or gone to other cities in Europe where there's a less hostile environment. And I think the government needs to realise that patients are suffering as a consequence of these vacancies, but also those staff who are still working are fatigued, overworked and struggling as well. We've got to keep them. And if they're overworked and stressed, they might leave. That's why I think the government needs to just put aside its ideology and dogma in relation to immigration and have a shortage occupation list that reflects the needs we have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Thank you. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Duval. It's on public service spending and London.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. Real terms, government public spending cuts have had a significant impact on Londoners. Over the past decade, London local government has seen the core funding it receives from central government reduced by 63% in real terms, which has hit many public services hard. For example, the government cut capital investment in new homes by 60%, yet to provide sufficient affordable housing, London needs 4 times more government funding. Over £36 million was cut from annual youth service budgets in London between 2011 and 2021, leading to fewer youth workers and youth centres closing. A decade of cuts to policing has forced the Met to make £850 million of savings since 2010, and the Crown Prosecution Service budget has shrunk by 25%, which has further increased London's backlog of cases relative to other UK regions. And the government's disregard for our capital city continues. There was virtually no reference to London in last week's budget. The government's cuts will hurt all Londoners, but especially those in low incomes, Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities and disabled Londoners. I once again urge the government to work with me to increase real terms funding for public services in London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of that, can you just tell us, I think since we last asked the question, we've talked a lot in this chamber about the growth strategy. Has any government ministers engaged with you, including the Minister of London, around the contribution that you Londoners can make towards the growth strategy, our sectors of the economy, and what they could do to help and boost those sectors?
No, there's been no significant conversations about this. And you bear in mind, we contribute north of £40 billion a year to the national treasury. We think the way to make our country more equal is not to make London poorer, but to enable all parts of the country to do even more. The government's only going to reach its growth targets with London playing its weight, and that's why I don't understand why they appear to be cutting their nose to spite their face by not working with us. We've got some great businesses in London, but also great universities, great life sciences, great culture, great tech, great professional services, great financial services. We've got capacity for growth. And I'm surprised they don't want to work more closely with us. I've reached out to the Chancellor and others in the government, and I'm hoping that we begin these conversations to work together in relation to this point. And the final point on that is the Deputy Mayor for Business, Rajesh Agrawal, was in India last week, banging the drum for London. There is a big appetite, and I don't say this in any way disparaging to other parts of the country. The appetite is to come to London. And what the government's in danger of doing is, because they're obsessed with, inverted commas, levelling up at the expense of London, they're potentially saying no to investments that could come to UK via London because of their anti-London attitude.
And it's quite clear there isn't enough government investment going into those public services, so the only way that, if they're not, taxes alone is not going to solve some of the growth that we need for our public services. We need this growth.
Look, if there's growth, it means businesses pay more in taxes. It means those more people working for the businesses pay more in taxes. So it means more money to spend on public services. But also, the way to increase productivity, which is linked to growth, is having more people who are healthy and well, not waiting in queues for the NHS. To have people getting better qualifications, whether it's in school, universities, AEB sector, apprenticeships and so forth. they're not even devolving to us the power to be in charge of apprentices. Look, I speak to, I would argue, more employees on a daily basis than the government does or civil servants do. We know where there's an appetite for apprentices. I mean, Zach Polanski rightly raised the issue of retrofit. Huge opportunity for apprentices in that area because they get paid while learning these skills, right? We're not in charge of apprentices. It's done by civil servants in the DfE. That can't be right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assemblymember Berry, and it's on defining obsolete homes for grant purposes.
Thank you for your question. In exceptional circumstances, some funding is available through the Affordable Homes Programme 21-26 for replacing obsolete homes that are demolished in estate regeneration. The Capital Funding Guide for Affordable Housing defines an obsolete home as one where an affordable home is no longer considered by the landlord to be capable for letting for long-term tenancies for reasons pertaining to condition, type or building standards, regulations or safety. City Hall is unable to provide a breakdown of replacement homes funded on that basis as the information is currently commercially sensitive. Once the GLA has agreed the programme with partners, City Hall will be able to share that information. The 21-26 AHP programme provisions has in it to fund replacement homes, but it doesn't give councils and housing associations permission to demolish unnecessarily. The guidance is clear that funding only applies in exceptional circumstances where homes need to be replaced because they're genuinely obsolete. These conditions work in tandem with my other policies on redeveloping homes to help ensure that demolition only happens where it's really necessary and that redevelopment provides much needed additional affordable homes. My London plan is clear that councils and housing associations should always consider alternatives and assess social and environmental impacts when considering demolition. It also requires them to replace or increase any affordable housing demolished. My resident ballot requirement means I only fund strategic estate regeneration schemes involving demolition where landlords demonstrate residents' support plans via a ballot. To be clear, that requirement will typically apply to regeneration projects seeking funding to replace obsolete homes. London has some of the country's oldest housing stock, and not every home can be refurbished. Where homes can be maintained and are in use, landlords are subject to statutory obligations to meet appropriate standards. I'm aware this hasn't always been the case. The tragic death of Awab Ishak in Rochdale makes that starkly apparent. That's why I recently refused funding to housing providers that fail to meet the regulator's standards. Providers need to ensure existing residents have decent homes before delivering new ones. To help landlords meet their obligations, I've urged the government to provide emergency funding to make all London's social rented homes safe and warm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Your answer there, it does reflect what I thought the goals of your housing programme were. Now, this question comes from finding out that in 10 boroughs in London, councils and housing associations are getting grant from your 2021-26 Affordable Homes Programme, and they are to demolish 1,000 social housing homes based on your definition of obsolete. Now, this is despite, when it was introduced, I was very pleased, and your Deputy Mayor for Housing, Tom Copley, told me the new conditions meant there will be very little grant available to buy homes for demolition. One of the officers also said to the committee the only exception will be if the landlord can prove that the home is obsolete. But I've been struggling to get more information from you and from councils. So can you tell me, therefore, first, how much grant in total has been given out to replace these 1,008 homes on estates deemed obsolete by the landlords?
So the 21-26 figures haven't been finalised. That's why we can't release the figures, because they are still being negotiated. But I'm more than happy for Tom Copley to meet with you, even if it's on a private undertaking basis, to talk through with you where we are, if that helps alleviate your concerns.
That would be very helpful. It seems like it would be, on the average grants you've been giving out across the programme as a whole, it seems like it would be an awful lot of money. I also wanted to know what these councils understood obsolete to mean when condemning the homes like this. Your officers couldn't tell me, as they hadn't asked councils to provide assessments, so I asked the councils through Freedom of Information. And what I got back ranged from confusing to Kafkaesque. One council told me the homes were obsolete because in 2003 the residents of the estate voted in favour of regeneration. Another gave me the circular answer. The bid asked us to confirm that the homes meet the GLA definition of obsolete homes. I asked what evidence they needed to provide when making grant bids, and one of them said, we're not required to provide evidence. So it seems like the definition and the reasons are basically just because we want to from landlords there. For 342 of the homes also, I couldn't get any information because they're housing association homes. The councils did not run them. They didn't have to FOI. Answer the FOIs because of that. Something's going on here. I really would like to know that your officers are applying some rigour, some checks to this policy. So can you do something about that? You must admit that it's being exploited as a bit of a loophole.
Can I just say, what you said isn't great. That's understandable from me. Can I take this away, Chair, in relation to what I don't want is councils playing off their officers against our officers. What I don't want is homes that can be refurbished, not be refurbished. Of course, not every home can be refurbished, and I know you accept that. What I don't want is that to be used as a loophole.
Exactly.
To demolish a home when it could be refurbished. So can I take this away, Chair, to reassure myself and also to reassure the member?
I'd be really happy if you could investigate. The guidance doesn't ask for it. No evidence has been required, and I think you should go and get some, because there are homes out there that are clearly can be refurbished. They're right next to homes that are going to be refurbished, and yet they've been condemned.
Okay, so Barry, you're out of time now.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next question is the name of Assembly-Member Devenish. It's on deportations and public safety.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. Tackling violence and making our city safer is my #1 priority, and I take my responsibilities for public safety and policing extremely seriously. I've been determined to be tough on crime and tough on the complex causes of crime. I've provided a record £1 billion investment in policing since 2016, which has funded 1,300 more police officers to help suppress violence in local areas, including Met Police officer numbers, increasing Met Police officer numbers to the highest ever levels. I set up the first violence reduction unit in England and Wales in 2019 to lead an approach to tackling violence rooted in prevention and early intervention. The VRU uses research, data and intelligence to better understand the causes and drivers of violence and is invested in programmes to provide activities, guidance and positive opportunities for more than 70,000 young people, their families and communities. As a result of our relentless focus and the hard work of police officers and youth workers across the capital, knife crime, gun crime and violence affecting young people have decreased in London, bucking the national trend. I'm also committed to opposing the government's discriminatory, hostile environment, which can lead to Londoners being disproportionately targeted and subjected to punitive immigration policies. These policies impact young people in London who cannot afford to access their residency and citizenship rights. The high cost of citizenship applications has left thousands of children and young people, often born and raised in the UK, without secure status. This includes descendants of the Windrush generation, and it disproportionately impacts black and minority ethnic Londoners. Despite being born or raised in Britain, these practical and unnecessary barriers to citizenship can leave people vulnerable to deportation. Some young people are groomed into criminal activity through county lines, sometimes while trying to save money to secure their immigration status. If we want to be serious about tackling the root causes of crime, we can't overlook the precarity, discrimination and unfair double punishments created by the UK's hostile approach to immigration. Providing young people with an affordable route to settlement and citizenship would give them stability and the rights and entitlements they need to thrive in the UK. For these reasons, I've championed rights to residency and citizenship, including through investing in children's specialist immigration advice for children in care, supporting the immigration advice sector to meet the needs of young Londoners, and launching the Migrant Londoners Hub with information for Londoners with immigration needs on how to access information and find support.
Mr. Mayor, when you called for a halt to a deportation flight in February 2020, did you monitor those who were granted removal from the flight at the last minute to see if any further crimes were committed by those people?
Look, the key point in relation to anyone subject to deportation is to ensure there's due process. And that's the key point in relation to the changes the government's bringing in. And the point that I made then, and I make it now, is due process is incredibly important. One of the things that we should be proud of is that we basically wrote some of these conventions that are relied upon by countries around the world.
Well, due process is very important, Mr. Mayor, but I'm going to quote the Sun newspaper of this morning about one of your colleagues. Foreign crooks, including drug dealers, carried out more crime in the UK after Keir Starmer campaigned for them to stay. Now, do you really think Londoners think you or Mr. Starmer are in touch or out of touch on public safety?
I suppose the obvious way is to look at the polls. I think we're doing okay, mate.
Well, we'll see when it comes to the general election, because I think Londoners are disgusted when people are allowed to stay in this country and commit heinous crimes. And on the flight to the one that you didn't, you you helped stop the deportation, there was a murder, a horrific crime murder, which in your answer, of course, you did your usual deflection. You didn't answer the question. Surely you must understand this is serious, and Londoners expect you to keep them safe, and Keir Starmer, as the proposed Prime Minister, to keep them safe if the British public were foolish enough to elect him.
I think that the member's in danger of conflating dangerous, violent people who should be prevented from committing their act, arrested, charged, prosecuted, and sent to prison for a long time, and issues around race, citizenship, and immigration.
Not at all. Not at all.
And I think, and it's really important.
At all.
And it's really important.
Mr. Mayor, you're out
really
of touch.
important.
Assembly Member Devenish, you've asked a question. Let the Mayor answer, please.
And it's really important to distinguish those two things. I'm quite clear in relation to the importance of being tough on crime, and you've seen that by, unlike other mayors, investing in policing, unlike other governments supporting our police service, bear down on crime by being tough on crime and the cause of crime. But also it's important to recognise that there are many Londoners who, because they've got the wrong documentation or no documentation, they've not got citizenship. We want to support those as well.
Well, the media this morning has done the right thing with Keir Starmer. He's been caught out in the media on this very subject, and we all know your view: soft on criminals.
Well, I've seen all the front pages today, and I think Keir Starmer's a happier man than Boris Johnson today.
Okay. Let's call this an end here. Let's move to the next question. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Bailey on the fairness of outcomes.
Thank you, Chair. Consultation is an important part of our democratic and decision-making process. I take consultations seriously in the GLA family, as they provide a cornerstone for good decision-making that is based on the views of Londoners. That's why we go to great lengths to make sure we elicit responses from a cross-section of Londoners that is representative as possible. All of our statutory strategies, from the Mayor's Transport Strategy to the London Environment Strategy and the London Housing Strategy, were subject to rigorous consultations that fed directly into their development. The largest consultation ever run from the GLA itself was on my London Plan. This process spanned over 2 years, including more than 11 public events and eliciting hundreds of submissions. The engagement portal on the GLA website is clear and easy to use and sets out how Londoners can have their say in all consultations currently open. Londoners can also engage with our policymakers directly on Talk London on a more regular and informal basis. I was elected with a strong mandate by Londoners themselves, and it's vital that I carry out and implement the wishes of Londoners who elected me. Consultations are a crucial part of determining how we can best do that from City Hall, and as such we approach every consultation with an open mind. I'm proud to run a mayoralty that puts the needs and views of Londoners at the heart of everything we do. Londoners who are from so-called hard-to-reach communities are only underserved because government and others don't work hard enough to reach them. This is not the case at City Hall. It's vital that consultations reach Londoners that represent the whole of the city to ensure that results are as accurate and fair a reflection of Londoners' views as possible. I'll never make an apology for ensuring that this is the case for all of our consultations. Integrity, openness and honesty are the principles of which I seek to run my administration, including the way we run our consultations. I'm confident we'll continue to live by those values going forward.
Afternoon, Mayor. Thank you for your answer. And can I just say I appreciated your answer on a very difficult issue of strip searching young people, because it is very complicated. I did appreciate that. Look, many of the parents, youth workers, drug workers I speak to are worried about your Drugs Commission, because you've selected a chair who has made very positive comments as far as he's concerned around the legalisation of drugs, and people are worried that the whole commission will be lopsided because who you have chairing it. What can you do to assure Londoners that is not the case?
I think it's an important point you raise. Let me just send to the chair the transcript of what you said and see what he can do to reassure you, because it's important not simply to speak to the converted, but the commission can have a purpose. You want to bring on side those who aren't on side. So can I take that away, Chair, and literally just report to him verbatim what you said, because it's an important point.
Thank you. Can I also make the plea that there's been a real emphasis on drug dealers and reducing the impact of being stopped and searched and found, but it hasn't been enough of an emphasis on the wider crime that drugs generate. Even just this morning, reading on Twitter, people saying there's a group of people who smoke under the window of their children. That's a health issue. You have people who have nothing to do with drugs at all, but have to suffer the robberies and the burglaries, etc., etc. So can you make sure that that's a big feature of any conversations that I had in the Drugs Commission?
Yeah, well, one of the things, again, I'm in danger of agreeing with Sean Bailey. but once again, one of the things that I think is important to get across on there, and I think there is on there, I've forgotten the detail, but a crime enforcement angle, because you will know this from your background, but the number of acts of criminality linked to the drugs trade, organised crime, when you go and visit the NCA, when you speak to those involved in county lines, it's all linked in relation to drugs. I'm not saying it's all, cannabis, but I'm saying there are links, right? And so, just to reassure myself, I think there is that crime enforcement perspective. But again, let me take this away and look into this.
Please do, because you made an announcement in a cannabis farm, and it sent a message that the decision had already been made, and we'll all be needed to be persuaded.
You are out of time.
Okay, Chair. Okay.
But
it's the one time I've agreed with the Mayor. I'm trying to enjoy the moment
here. Let's end here with a good moment here. But okay. And look, the Conservative group is out of time, but Assembly Member Duval has time on his clock. Over to you.
I'm thinking whether to end on a good moment. There's so much I could add, but nevertheless, in terms of the title, Fairness in Outcomes, and the issues that said around consultation and the issues around that, in some ways, there's so much about fairness and outcomes here, and in terms of some of the issues around taxation, you were rightly challenged around some of your taxation problems, and you rightly defend why you make the choices that you do. And some of the issues around fairness and outcomes is why do you think those in the richest of society who want to escape their responsibilities for paying their fair shares, right, on their taxation issues, get away with it all the time? They get away with it all the time on fairness and outcomes. What is it that we should be doing as politicians and leading the way? And there are some politicians who are involved in that as well. What's your view? Well,
I think the most obvious example is you look at the amount of resources that HMRC devotes to, for good reasons, it could be argued, benefits fraud. Look at the amount of resources, or lack of, they do towards tax evasion. And that's why it's really important in fairness of outcomes, that we look into all sorts of issues. In London, we're doing what we can to make sure those with that those who need support get support. The problem is that even though we know what we're going to do, we haven't got the support from the government to do it. We are a very centralised...
Assembly Member Duval, if you ask the next question, please, make sure you link it to the question that's on the question paper.
I did. Fairness and
outcomes. It says fairness
and consultation. And the consultation
but not about taxation.
Around taxation... sorry, I shouldn't have had to say this, Chair. I hope it's not come off my time and you're going to add it back on. In terms
I've been asked to...
in that sense, so I've raised the issue about consultation and taxation. I've talked about fairness and outcomes. I've pointed out there are a number of politicians, including Conservative politicians now that you've raised it, that seem to think they don't need to pay their fair whack. All sorts of cabinet ministers, former chancellors, actually the Prime Minister's wife as well.
Chair, but he's just making more of a statement.
I just want to know what the Mayor's view about fairness and outcomes.
Yeah, but it's
paying
Chair, with respect, my question was about consultations.
Hang on. I thought we were on a good time, but look, I want this question to be linked specifically to fairness of outcomes, right? And if the Assembly members are doing that, I'm going to let this question stand, okay? Now, and I think he's done that, right? Some people have run out of their time, but he has his time on his clock, right, which he can use. And I want to, but I want you to stick to the rules, Assembly Member Duval.
Can we all use the title, not the question, then in future? Yeah. We'll use the title, not the question, when we do linking.
The member's taking up my time, Chair. I think the Mayor understood the question, and I think he understood it.
It's just a procedural point, Len. You
hang
love
on.
procedure. You love procedure normally, so I just want to know that we can all do that.
Assembly Member Best, right? Please don't interrupt unnecessarily, right? It's just we're going to stay longer. If the Assembly members made a explanation, and I accept that, that's fine. The Mayor can answer the question.
I just want to check that we can all do
we can all ask questions which are relevant to the question on the paper. Okay. Assembly Member Khan, Mayor Khan, sorry.
Assembly Member Khan.
It's I'm not sure what I can add to the last minute and a half.
Assembly Member Deval?
Chair, in terms of going back to some of the criticism that you've had around consultations, and do you think generally that they've been unfair towards you in the sense of when you have actually responded to some of the issues around that? Do you think that people have sort of, misled people really and encouraged more angriness around some of the issues of consultations around than there should have been?
What you're seeing is people who should know better using tactics used by bad actors to put out misinformation and to cast aspersions in relation to a lot of the work decent civil servants do. It is a fact, and you can look at the views of independent experts. Since the GLA was founded in 2000, there's never been more consultations, more engagements, more work done by City Hall to engage with Londoners, including trying innovative things as well. And it's really important, though, to recognise that process does matter. I think one of the members made the point about procedural issues. Process does matter. If you get the process right, it leads to a better substantive decision. But also, the phrase they used in one of my answers was, there's this horrible phrase that was used when I first became mayor, hard-to-reach communities. They're not hard to reach, they're underserved. Right? We've got to flip it on its head and make it easier to reach them, make it easier to engage with them. Because otherwise, the usual suspects, the sort of bloke hectoring from over there, heckling from over there, with sharp elbows, his voice is heard. What about those whose voice isn't heard? And it's really important that we improve our processes to involve more and more Londoners.
And do you see that the development of consultation in that area? I mean, look, I'm a big fan of TfL, but actually they do get some things wrong. Do you not think, going back to some of the earlier conversations, that really we need to overhaul some of those consultation processes around TfL to actually achieve some of those issues that you want? It's not perfect, it's okay. Right, but in different times and different circumstances, do we need to make further changes, further reviews around how we consult?
Yeah, and not just TfL, but the police. The police is a more relevant example this week, right? How do you engage with the communities that are found to be the receiving end of institutional discrimination?
Yep.
TfL, how do you engage properly and better with, Keith mentioned older people, with disabled people, with, Caroline mentioned in relation to police, but it refers to TfL neurodiverse people. We've got to carry on adapting and innovating. Anybody who thinks it's mission accomplished, clearly doesn't understand, the developing needs of our city and our Londoners. And I genuinely think the more you get Londoners involved in decision-making, the better the quality of the decision-making. It applies to all our services. Some of the work the fire service is doing in London, Andy Rowe's doing, is exemplary, right? No fire service in the country is doing the outreach and the consultation that we did in advance of the community management plan that we did this year, the so-called London Safety Plan, and we're continuing to do after Afzal's report. The reason why these issues have been highlighted is because of us shining the spotlight on this. People think, oh no, it's just London. We're ahead of other cities, right? Let's not fool ourselves into thinking fire services around the country have got similar problems to LFB. Let's not kid ourselves into thinking, and nobody sensible does, that police services around the country have got similar problems. And the same goes for providing services. I think we do it better. Sure, question, could we do it even better? Yeah, we could.
And certainly the Casey review, it was quite clear. We need to review the Casey review, the way the police are engaging with communities. It's quite clear, isn't it? That's a big task of work. And overall in some of those institutions too, whether they're safety boards or our police engage with people at ward level, they've got to be looked at again.
Absolutely. I appointed London's first ever independent victims commissioner. But even Claire Waxman, the problems she's had getting access to stuff you'd have thought she'd get access to, and she's the victims commissioner. Yeah. Put aside the ordinary citizen that you mentioned, the ward meetings and so forth. So we've got to recalibrate how we engage, but also there's got to be an understanding that actually people who are interested aren't necessarily hostile, and sometimes the criticism can lead to better outcomes. And so that engagement process is really important. Listen, one thing I was really pleased by is Louise Casey recognising the importance of neighbourhood teams. Bobby back in the beat, right? Understanding the community intelligence, knowing the neighbours, understanding what's going on. That's is that consultation, is that engagement? That's being nearer to where the decisions are made. And we need more of that on all of our public services.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the answers you've given. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out in my name on the agenda, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the question asked? Agreed. Can I ask the Assembly to agree that in relation to urgent matters only, a general delegation authority be given to the Chair of the GLA Oversight Committee in consultation with the party group leaders, relevant committee chairs and myself as Chair of the Assembly from the close of this meeting until the annual meeting on the 4th of May 2023?
Agreed.
The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the annual meeting, which will take place at 2 p.m. on Thursday, the 4th of May 2023 in the Chamber of City Hall. So there's no other business requiring consideration, so this meeting comes to an end. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.